This is an NBC News special report. Here's Tom Yamas.
And good day. We are coming on the air with breaking news right now. Hurricane Ian is making landfall in South Carolina as a dangerous Cat 1 storm with winds of up to 85 miles an hour, bringing potentially life-threatening storm surge of up to 7 feet along the coast. Power is already out for tens of thousands. The governor declared a state of emergency earlier this week, but has not ordered emergency evacuations. This is the second time Hurricane Ian has made landfall in the U.S. Just 2 days ago, it slammed ashore as a massive storm that devastated parts of Florida, tearing across the state. And now, after regaining strength over the Atlantic, it has hit land yet again. Shaq Brewster is live for us right now in Charleston, South Carolina, where conditions are going quickly downhill. Shaq, as you know, meteorologists say there's no such thing as a weak hurricane, and the coast of South Carolina is feeling that right now.
That's exactly right, Tom. This is exactly what Charleston was preparing for. The tropical storm force winds, the tropical storm force rains that you've been seeing for the past couple of hours here now. And I'll tell you, in the past couple of minutes, we heard from the Charleston Police Department saying that their officers, because of these conditions, are sheltering in place for the time being. They're saying that they're only going to respond to critical calls until these conditions get better. So if you hear that from the police, that's also the guidance for citizens. You've been hearing from officials that they wanted citizens since this morning to stay off the roads. We saw out as we were driving into Charleston that many of the roads were flooded. There were at least 24 intersections about 2 hours ago that were blocked off, and that was before we saw these heavy bands of wind and rain. So this is the situation in Charleston right now. But again, this is what the city has been preparing for, as they knew this tropical storm and now Hurricane Ian, as it was coming ashore, coming in this area, Tom.
All right, Shaq Brewster for us. I want to turn now to John Van Pelt. He's a storm chaser who's just across the Ashley River, not too far from where we were just hearing from Shaq right there. John, tell me about what you're seeing and what you're feeling on a bad thunderstorm day. You know, we can get Charleston to flood. What are you seeing right now?
Yeah, Tom, I've been doing hurricanes for Weather Nation for 9 years now, starting with Arthur a long time ago on the Outer Banks, and in Charleston, got to see Dorian, and the effects from Dorian were worse than what we've seen so far. I was not here for...
Okay, it is a hurricane. We've
trees down.
Oh.
So we've seen high winds today. We have seen surge coming in through the battery, and I'm going to walk over here, and you can see the rain has been coming down horizontally. We were in a little bit of a dry slot now. It's not as bad as it was 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes ago, the rain was horizontal and driving. It's even starting to brighten up a little bit here, Tom, as the clouds are blowing through and this dry slot is happening.
John, you know, we mentioned that there were no emergency evacuations as this Category 1 storm is essentially making landfall there in South Carolina. Are you seeing people out and about, or are people hunkering down for the time being?
You know, when we were coming down yesterday, people were getting prepared for it, but a lot of times tourists come down and they want to see the excitement of the storm, so people have been walking on the battery. We have seen people here in the marina checking on their boats also, but all in all, in the hotels, people have been staying inside, and the residents have been staying in too.
John Van Pelt for us. John, stand by. As we've been seeing a little north of Charleston, we want to start in Myrtle Beach. This is one of the most popular, and if not the largest beach on the South Carolina coast. They're part of the grandstand, and you really can't even see the beach anymore. The waves, the storm surge has overcome those sand dunes. And then Pawleys Island, if you're familiar at all with the South Carolina coast, a lot of people visit Pawleys Island and its famous pier. Well, we've been getting reports, this coming in from the police department. This just shows what it looks like right now on the ground. That's the pier on the left-hand side, and that's the pier right now. It's been completely washed away into the Atlantic. And with that, I want to bring Bill Cairns right now, who joins us live and has been tracking the storm for several days. Bill, so what it looks like from the pictures we're seeing right now, just north of Charleston, the Myrtle Beach area, that area is really feeling the force of Ian right now.
Yeah, not concerned at all with the storm surge from Charleston southwards down the coast. It's really been from Georgetown northwards. That video we just showed you from Pawleys Island is located right about here where the center of the storm is about to cross over. So we know for a fact we have a gauge out there on the spring-made pier near Myrtle Beach. It's at 5.23 feet as far as the total height of the storm surge. Now, the good news is that we're now heading towards low tide, so the water levels are starting to drop. They're not going to get any higher than they are now. But this is is the third highest they've ever seen. It just passed Isaias, and there's only 2 hurricanes, Matthew and Hugo, that had higher storm surges in this area around Myrtle Beach. The highest wind gust I've seen was 92 miles per hour in areas of Charleston. So the wind is on the backside. They just had a gust of 68. Expect a lot of tree damage in areas around Charleston, inland. That's where the winds have been the highest. Where it's actually making landfall, these winds aren't that bad in Georgetown and Myrtle Beach. This is an atypical hurricane. It's almost like a big nor'easter at this point. It will quickly be moving inland and weakening. Notice all the rain with this storm. That's going to be the concern. Once we get rid of this storm surge this late this afternoon, this evening, that threat will be over with. And then we'll have to deal with the rainfall threat and the flash flooding threat. It's pouring throughout all of North Carolina right now and the upstate of South Carolina. We also have a chance of tornadoes as we go throughout the afternoon and evening, all of eastern North Carolina and the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. So we still have life-threatening weather to take care of throughout the evening. That's why they're going to tell everyone, just wait till tomorrow till this thing is gone, because there's still very dangerous conditions out there now, Tom. We still are watching the storm surge that's now cresting and peaking, and then the winds will only slowly come down this afternoon.
And Bill, as we were looking at your radar there, it's just, you see the massive size of this storm stretching from Georgia all the way to Virginia. I want to talk about some differences now from when Ian first made landfall in Florida. The obvious difference, the wind speed, right? 150 miles per hour versus 85 right now. But I noticed something else. The storm is traveling a little faster at 14 miles per hour than when it first hit Florida. Does that make any difference for the residents there in those states?
It means that the worst of it's over not as long. I think it was 8 to 9 miles per hour that Ian was moving over Southwest Florida. But this is the classic example between a hurricane and a major hurricane. What you're seeing now in the videos and the pictures from the police department there in Pawleys Island, we're looking at storm surge that went over the dunes. It's into the roads, but most of these areas have flooded before in storms. They know to build these houses up. So you're seeing a lot of water in the areas where you typically park the cars. You put like the grill. We're not seeing water into homes, at least not yet. I haven't seen any of those pictures. The pier, you kind of expect that, unfortunately. A pier built out into the ocean in a hurricane. We lost one in Matthew. I think we lost one in Isaias in the Carolinas. That's kind of expected damage. So, nothing like Southwest Florida. It's a whole different ballgame when you get up there, Category 3, 4, and 5 landfalls, because even things that are built for a hurricane, usually they're not built for a Category 4 hurricane. Those building codes would be too strict and too expensive. So, I don't think we're going to see a lot of structural damage out of this, but we are going to have a lot of trees falling on houses and falling on cars, and that's the danger. And then we'll see tonight and tomorrow what flash flooding we get and what happens to the rivers in the days ahead when all this water collects. Yeah, one of those coastal communities we're obviously watching is Charleston. I want to go back to Shaq Brewster now. Shaq, as Bill mentioned, it is a hurricane. It's not a major hurricane, but already Charleston is dealing with some power outages.
That's exactly right. We heard from county officials saying that about 69,000 people were without power. That was about a half hour ago, before we saw many of these stronger wind gusts and rain bands. So that is the number that is expected to grow. We know that Charleston, this area, has been dealing with those tropical storm force wind gusts clocking in the 60s and potentially even 70s in some areas for a couple of hours at this point. So that is the situation that folks are going to have to deal with, even though they're concerned about the flooding. They're concerned about that high tide which just got through about a half hour or so ago. There is also that power concern where, again, officials saying about 69,000 people are without power right now, but that's a number that's expected to only go up as the storm continues to make its way through.
All right, Shaq, thank you for that. I want to jump over to Emily Aketa, who's across the harbor from where you are there in Charleston. Emily, tell me what you're seeing.
Well, we've been witnessing the conditions rapidly deteriorate over the last few hours. You can see it in the wind and the way it's blowing the trees behind me, pushing the rain sideways. You can also hear it. It's howling. There's a clanging in the background. I'm keeping an eye. There's a piece of roof peeling off because of the force of the winds. But really, the main point of concern in Charleston here is the water. You ask officials about it, residents about it. They know this area is very susceptible, vulnerable to storm surge and flooding because it is low, flat, and surrounded by water. We've got the Atlantic Ocean on one side. There are waterways weaving throughout the city of Charleston. And so that's where you see these predictions up to 7 feet of storm surge that people are really keeping an eye on. And earlier today, we already witnessed some of those roadways flooding. So as the rain continues to pound Charleston, it's definitely a concern people are watching for.
A lot of low-lying area there. Emily, I'm curious, behind you there, I don't know if this is something with the camera or is the sun actually peeking out through clouds there?
Let's take a look. You're asking about the sun?
Is that the sun there peeking out from clouds somehow? From the cloud cover?
It's definitely less ominous, but I wouldn't say the sun. I think it might just be the way the glare between the camera and all of the different elements that we're working in. It's remained pretty gray throughout the day. Again, the wind, the rain, and some flooding that we've seen in downtown Charleston.
All right, Emily, we appreciate that. That storm surge that hit Florida just 2 days ago devastated areas like Fort Myers. Steve Patterson is there for us. Steve, the cleanup there, just massive. Parts of that city just completely wiped off the map.
Tom, devastation as far as the eye can see. It starts here, it goes through town, mixed in with buildings, with homes, with power poles, with shredded roofs, with boats that have been taken from this sea and thrown into the road. This is what we've seen in just this area. Meanwhile, Sanibel Island, just about 20 minutes or so from here, rescue operations still going on there. About 200 people did not evacuate. Dozens at last count as of last night still had to be rescued. We've heard copters going back and forth as the rescue operation really throughout town continues. The death toll is expected to go up here. Tom, back to you.
Steve, real quick, are people there that are suffering, are they getting the supplies they need?
They are, Tom. We've seen utility trucks roll through here. We've seen ambulances roll through here. We've seen the National Guard in force in this area. They are getting help, but look around here, Tom. There is so much wreckage. It's going to take days, if not weeks, if not months, if not the better part of a year into next before they can get all the help that they need.
Steve Patterson also showing us one of the cruel realities of hurricanes. Right after all that devastation, you get some of the clearest days of the year. Steve Patterson, all of our team covering Hurricane Ian right now. We appreciate it. We'll have much more tonight on NBC Nightly News and, of course, on Top Story tonight on NBC News Now. I'm Tom Yamas in New York. Thank you for watching.
Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No.
Top Story with Tom Yamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
For Dateline Premium, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now tonight with Joshua Johnson. Weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Right now on NBC News Now,
we begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism?
Do you think this could have happened without social media? We're coming on the air with the news, NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now. Now tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Top Story with Tom Yamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
And I'm Cynthia McFadden in for Kate Snow. NBC News Daily starts right now.
Today, Friday, September 30th, 2022. Breaking news, second landfall. Hurricane Ian slamming into South Carolina, arriving just moments ago. How strong that storm is right now and where it's expected to go next.
Left in ruins, stunning images of Sanibel Island, Florida, revealing the true scope of Ian's catastrophic impact.
Thought it was going to eventually go over our heads. I called my daughters and said goodbye.
I think I've lost everything I own, and I'm trying to be brave.
And Lifeline, new video capturing the dramatic rescues underway across Florida. How crews are going from house to house to find survivors. We do begin with Hurricane Ian now making landfall yet again.
This time in South Carolina, putting more lives in harm's way. The National Hurricane Center is now warning of life-threatening storm surge and damaging winds.
Now take a look at what the radar looks like right now. That storm regained strength in the Atlantic after pounding Florida. We saw the intense rain and wind there.
We now know there are at least 14 confirmed deaths associated with Ian, according to local officials in Florida. In hard-hit Lee County, Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis says there is no running water. However, there is some progress to report. Power outages are down roughly 700,000 from yesterday's peak in Florida, and at least 700 rescues have been carried out. But let's begin right now with NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. Bill, what's the latest?
Well, I just saw my computer update this little jog on here, and typically when that happens, it means it's made official landfall. So I'm just trying to get the final confirmation from the Hurricane Center here to see if that's the case. So we're working on that. But they had a position update right here, and then you see that little jog there right over the top of about Muriel's Inlet, heading there towards Pawleys Island, almost over the top of Georgetown. When they give you an updated position point like that and it goes into our computers, typically that means we have official landfall. So we'll get you that confirmation shortly. It's just for the history books anyways, as the storm continues to move on shore as a Category 1 hurricane. The storm surge is peaking now. Hopefully the water levels are beginning to go down, but it's been a little scary the last couple hours. Pawleys Island Police Department has been showing us videos. They've been rescuing people from their homes. People had water into the bottom of their homes. So we know that there has been some significant damage. It's not going to look like Southwest Florida, but we know that for some of these people in these areas, it has been bad. And the Pawleys Island Pier, half of it is washed away into the ocean. I know that the Myrtle Beach areas, the dunes have been overtopped. Cherry Grove is a flood-prone area. All the houses are built on stilts, but the water's been all the way underneath those homes too. So that's the biggest concern right now for life and damage is the storm surge, which is peaking now. Thankfully, we're heading towards that low tide, which is around 5 o'clock this afternoon. And so the water should continue to drop, especially as the storm moves inland and the winds begin to weaken a little bit. So here's that pier in areas in Myrtle Beach. The highest ever was Hugo for a surge, 8-foot surge. This is going to go down as the third highest. This is where it looked like it peaked at about a little over 5-foot surge, and that beats Isaias from 2 years ago of 4.26. So an historic storm surge just after high tide by only about 2 hours in areas from Myrtle Beach to Georgetown. The winds, the highest winds have actually been on the backside of this storm in the Charleston area. 92-mile-per-hour wind gust was reported, so we know we're going to have some significant tree damage because of those wind gusts. The winds right now, and they're really not that strong, even near the center of the storm. It's the backside that has the highest winds. Our friends hopefully won't even lose too much power in North Carolina. My biggest concern I have for everyone, the New Bern, Greenville, Washington, Carteret County, heading out to the Outer Banks, all the way back down through Emerald Isle into areas of Wilmington, is the chance of isolated tornadoes. This is a tornado watch up till 10 o'clock, and the concern is thunderstorms coming in off the water, that those could spawn tornadoes. Sometimes we get a lot of tornadoes with landfalling systems. Sometimes we don't have many. We didn't have many when it made landfall, but the day before landfall, we had like 6 tornadoes reported in areas of South Florida, especially around Hollywood, Florida, and we had numerous problems with flooding. This will be the story after the winds die off this afternoon and this evening, and the storm surge is gone. The concern will be how much rain falls and where do we have all the flash flooding, because someone has a chance of getting at least 10 inches of rain, widespread 4 to 8 inches of rain through the region. And finally, guys, the timing on all this, by 8 p.m. this evening, the heaviest rain is over Charlotte into areas of Virginia and approaching Washington, D.C.
All right, Bill, thank you. Continuing coverage of Hurricane Ian making landfall now. You're watching NBC News Daily.
the day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
Right now on NBC News Now.
As we come on the air, here's what we know.
It has been dramatic, powerful.
We begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
We're getting out of this area right now because more air raid sirens are sounding.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Was there a school officer on campus? Because that's what we've been told.
No, fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
And the House has answered the call to create new gun laws.
The stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing on Capitol Hill.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
A terrifying night of flash floods.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge for primary purposes.
It's an interesting race here. I've just never covered anything like it. This is big when we're talking about November.
How many doors do you think you've each knocked on?
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground on this issue?
What do you think when you see the activism that's happening right now?
Do you think this movement could have happened without social media?
A lot to talk about as we continue our rolling coverage.
We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Hey, podcast fans, ready to unlock our true crime mysteries? Try Dateline Premium on Apple Podcasts. You'll get early access to originals, plus bonus content, and everything is ad-free. So head to Apple Podcasts now to subscribe.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world. Because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Breaking right now, we are tracking Hurricane Ian for you. It officially made a second landfall as a Category 1 hurricane, this time in South Carolina. I want to turn to NBC's Kathy Park. She is posted in Charleston for us on the southern edge of where this storm is now. Kathy, talk to us about conditions and how they've changed, what you're dealing with.
Yeah, so the big headline continues to be these gusty conditions. We've been monitoring these intense wind gusts throughout the morning, now the afternoon. So that seems to be the biggest challenge at this point. And because conditions are still pretty dangerous right now, emergency responders, even Charleston police officers are sheltering in place until conditions improve. I just got an alert on my phone. It looks like flash flooding also going to be a big concern as we kind of get through this evening. It's in place until 5 o'clock tonight, but we were anticipating landfall in the Charleston area earlier this morning. But as you can see here, Aaron, the landscape has changed. You see a lot of debris scattered all over here on the ground. Behind me is the Ashley River. We monitored high tide, and we were anticipating potentially this kind of worst case scenario, this perfect storm of high tide, also the storm making landfall here, and of course the storm surge as well. But it looks like we've kind of dodged some of those challenges, and now the storm, as you mentioned, just made landfall a little bit north of here. But officials are saying, look, you don't want to be outside even at this point. I know things are starting to clear up and the water is starting to recede, but conditions are still pretty dangerous, and we're told that until the wind gusts die down a little bit closer to 35 miles per hour, that's when they feel more comfortable for those emergency responders to come out. We do know that here in the state of South Carolina, of course, the governor has declared a state of emergency ever since yesterday. Stopped short of mandatory evacuations, but of course urged people to have an emergency plan in place. folks here in the low country, they know what to do. They have weathered a lot of storms. They deal with flooding even on a good day when it's sunny outside. When they have high tide, there is flooding in the downtown area. But of course, when you have a Cat 1 hurricane rolling through the area, potentially making landfall, obviously they made preparations well in advance, but shelters are also open. At last check, we were told that dozens of people are utilizing the shelters right now, but it looks like at this point things are slowly starting to improve, but the wind gusts, the big headline out here, Aaron.
I am curious, Kathy, as we've been looking at video of rushing water in some other parts of that region. We've also seen pieces of video from downtown Charleston, from the Old City area, where there's been a lot of high water as well. You mentioned that the governor has declared the state of emergency. There's an evacuation order, sort of, but not a lot of people have taken that warning. 15% of the shelters are full there, or shelters are at 15% capacity at this point. Do we know if people did try to get out to any degree, or to what degree people did try to leave their homes or places that may have been a little too low-lying in the lowest parts of the low country there?
Yeah, so just anecdotally, when we were out and about yesterday in the downtown area, and a lot of people that we spoke with told us that they plan on hunkering down and kind of weathering the storm and riding it out. The governor did declare a state of emergency, but did stop short of those mandatory evacuations, just kind of monitoring the situation and really encourage people to stay inside, not to be out on the roadways today, Aaron.
We also heard reports, and we're sort of getting mixed reports about the impact this storm is having on infrastructure in that area. There were reports about, as you noted, some roads that maybe were closed. There were also some notes from the state that said roads were not closed. What's been your experience on that front? Has it been difficult to really get around? Or emergency crews sort of having to hold and wait?
Yeah, well, we have kind of been hunkered down in the waterfront area, and as far as we know, we haven't seen a lot of movement around here, which is certainly good news. But closer to the beaches, we know that portions of a pier has broken off, and I'm just kind of looking at our hotel here, and there are just some pieces of the awning that's starting to peel off as well. So these wind gusts certainly taking a toll on the infrastructure here in South Carolina, but this certainly is not over. We're not in the clear just yet.
All right, Kathy Park in Charleston, thank you. We're going to continue following this breaking news. Hurricane Ian making that second landfall in South Carolina. You're watching NBC News Daily.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
Right now on Morning News Now.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
And this is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world. Because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves.
You can actually see they're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Yamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Stay on top of breaking news and the biggest stories of the day with NBC News Daily.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Morgan Radford.
And I'm Vicki Wynn.
I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
And I'm Kate Snow.
Get in-depth reporting from across the country.
What's your reaction to the president's comments?
And around the world.
Are Ukrainians continuing to make advances?
And ways you can take care of your health.
Who should be getting tested, and frankly, how often?
And your wallet.
Costs are skyrocketing. How to manage soaring prices.
NBC News Daily. Weekdays from 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern on NBC News Now.
All right, bottom of the hour now. We're following the breaking news today. Hurricane Ian has made a second landfall, this time in South Carolina.
Ian's impacts have been felt in the Carolinas for hours now. Strong wind and heavy rain are pounding the coast. Life-threatening storm surge is also a major concern, just as it was in Florida.
At the same time, we're getting an up-close look at some of that devastation in communities like Fort Myers and Sanibel Island in Florida. Some estimate the recovery in some of these areas could take not months, but years. We do have a team of reporters on this for you. Let's get right over to meteorologist Bill Cairns first here. Bill, the official landfall at 2:05 this afternoon Eastern time. Walk us through where we are, what we can expect in the coming hours.
I think everyone is happy to get this on shore finally, right? I mean, we've been tracking this thing for 10 days. Ever since it was approaching the Leeward Islands, and we knew it would be a threat. And obviously, Cuba got hit by a Category 3, Southwest Florida Category 4, and now Category 1 landfall over the top of Georgetown. So this will weaken quickly. There's not a lot of backsides to this storm. I mean, I wouldn't doubt if the sun comes out where it makes landfall later on for a nice sunset. There's barely even any rain on the backside of this storm. Almost all of the bad with the storm is onshore now with the rain and the really strong winds. We do have to worry about isolated tornadoes coming into areas of eastern North Carolina, and that will continue through the evening. So with that landfall into Georgetown, all of the worst storm surge was north of that. So that's the Pawleys Island area, heading up here towards Myrtle Beach, North Myrtle Beach. The water levels were still pretty high, too, just south here down the Wrightsville Beach and Carolina Beach. But the worst of it appears to be in between Myrtle Beach and Georgetown as far as the storm surge goes. And that appears to have been accurate. The Hurricane Center said possibility of 4 to 7 feet. It looks like we've had at least 5 to 6 feet in a few areas. And so that's the position now. That's heading inland. So we got past the high tide at 11:18. So it didn't hit at the peak of high tide, but it was pretty close. I mean, the tide only came down about 6 to 12 inches in some cases. So the high water level was very significant. And that's why we have dunes that are overwashed. That's why we do have water in some houses. And that's why you're going to see some damage out of this. The next high tide isn't until 11:31 this evening. But by then, the storm is heading towards Charlotte. And the winds will be so weak that we shouldn't have any problems with water later on this evening. The winds will stay up. Now we're going to start to watch some of those higher winds moving inland. So we'll have a chance of power outages in interior South Carolina. So far, so good. Fayetteville just had a gust of 47. So that's when you start getting some branches down. But we can deal with these 30 and 40 mile per hour winds. We'd like to keep power on for as many people as possible, but still gusting to 60 in Charleston. Still some of the strongest winds that we've had. And I did mention that threat in eastern North Carolina. The threat for you is heavy rain, flash flooding, getting into the rivers and the creeks, and eventually into the Neuse River. But as far as the flash flood warnings go, you can see we already have numerous of those guys. So just because the storm surge threat's going to pass us by, we're still going to have dangerous, life-threatening weather right through the night.
All right, Bill Cairns for us. Bill, thanks.
Let's bring in NBC's Wendy Woolfolk in Charleston, South Carolina. Wendy, the rain and wind has been picking up all day, as we've seen. Show us what you're seeing right now in Charleston.
Hey, Cynthia, I can say in the last 20 minutes, conditions here in Charleston have dramatically improved. Look behind me. You can see what the damage has already done, though. These trees below here, that we're on the 4th floor balcony. We are safe, but on a 4th floor balcony, these trees just snapped. And this entire parking lot was swimmable a few minutes ago. And now you can even see downtown Charleston. This entire morning with the torrential downpours and all of the wind, you could not see downtown Charleston from where we're standing. In the background over there, there's the Citadel School and these two bridges. You've not seen cars go over them at all. Now, it seems to me like that we could see the sunlight anytime now. It's brightening. The wind has calmed down. We do know that there are several people who decided in this marina behind me to ride it out in these boats. It didn't seem like these boats got tossed around very much. So, maybe that was the right answer for them for today. But it was a terrifying morning for all of us in this area, Cynthia.
Understood. Wendy, we know that the airport in Charleston is shut down till at least tomorrow morning. Roads have been shut as well. What are city leaders telling people who are still in the city?
They're telling people to hunker down, even though it seems like things are better and that we've dodged a bullet here in Charleston. Because at this point, you don't know what damage has been done. You don't know where these active power lines have gone down. They just haven't had a chance to assess the damage. And they want the professionals to get out there once these winds die down. And they said they wanted to get between 30 and 40 miles per hour before they would send these crews out safely to assess what's going on. So they're still saying, shelter in place, hunker down until we can figure out exactly what the damage is in the immediate area. We can tell you, though, our lights have been flickering several times. In our hotel, we do have a generator here, but more than 100,000 customers are without power in downtown Charleston and in the Low Country, and it's going to take some time. So people are still going to have to be patient. I feel like we've been talking about Ian for so long, and I'm sure people are ready to be done with Ian, but I think we all have to be patient just a little while longer.
Well, we're certainly happy to see you and your team safe. Thanks for that update.
Now, we do want to talk a little bit more about Ian in Florida as it makes that second landfall in South Carolina. Millions of people in Florida are assessing the damage that was left behind by this storm. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is in Fort Myers for us now, near the west coast of Florida. Steve, show us what you've been seeing there today in Fort Myers.
Think about millions of people without power, millions of people, as you said, probably assessing some sort of damage, hundreds of thousands in this area, waking up to scenes like this. This is Fort Myers Beach. We're about 20 miles from Sanibel. What I can see in my periphery and all around, 360 degrees, a panorama of damage. Everything here, looks like a tool shed maybe, because I'm seeing personal items that would have been in people's normal lives before this, right? And then you mix that with the concrete that has been ripped up off the earth, the palm trees that have come down, the sheets of metal, the cinder blocks that must weigh tons or at least hundreds of pounds, all scattered damage, all part of the same soup of devastation. As you hear choppers above, we've heard this solid as we've been standing here. Some of those may be rescue choppers, others may be news choppers surveying the damage as well. But behind me as well, it just continues and it goes and it goes and it goes. To my left, there is what appears to be some sort of pro bait shop that we've heard. We know the gentleman was building his life here. He was extending this to a bar. But then you think about how could a hurricane scatter all of this damage the same way that it would scatter some of the smaller pieces? And then you realize that as I was coming in, I looked to my right, you saw the dock that was tore up as that helicopter swirling above us now appears to be, it may be a rescue copter. And you see some of the damage here down below in the marina, and then you realize that there used to be boats there, because as you're driving in, there are several boats, and we're talking fishing boats and recreational boats and yachts next to the highway coming in. You realize that those boats are from where this scene is that you're looking at right now, and then you realize the terrible force of this storm. Several people are doing that as well. Meanwhile, Sanibel Island, about 20 minutes from here, people there are cut off. We know at least 200 homes decided not to evacuate. As of last night, dozens of people still needed some sort of rescue. We know those rescues have been going through. That may have been even part of that as we were speaking. So we don't know how many people have been rescued. We knew, though, that there were some injuries on that island. 2 people had died. And just think about, you have no power, you have maybe no shelter, and you're scattered, stranded on an island. So many scenes of devastation, heartbreak, and people that still need help. Cynthia, Aaron?
Steve, we talk about Sanibel, and obviously as we look at some of the images that have come from that island, there are other barrier islands where there were people who are likely still stranded as well. We think about where this storm actually came ashore in Florida. all day long we've seen those incredible images of the causeway, in particular in Sanibel, just wiped out. Folks have said that, they don't know when they're going to be able to really get access again. What do we know about the complexity of the effort to get to, to be able to search, to be able to do rescues in places like that? What do we know about the complexity of the effort to do those things?
Well, you said it. The causeway is wiped out, right? So 4 or 5 sections of that causeway are gone, evaporated, done. So there is no way to get supplies by land or people by land or people back across by land or by bridge or by structure. So everything has to be either air or boat. And you can imagine the complications that come from that when you're talking about people that are stranded in a situation like that, that are used to driving across and getting to the mainland, and now they can't. I can't tell you the inner workings of the rescue operation. What I can tell you is that we constantly see helicopters going back and forth in that direction, and that we know that there have been some rescues, but there may be people that are still stranded, maybe people that need help and need help immediately. Guys.
All right, Steve Patterson for us in Fort Myers, Florida today. Steve, thank you.
Well, President Biden has just given an update on the federal response to Hurricane Ian. He says the government will provide whatever assistance is needed. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us now. Mike, President Biden spoke with the governors of both Florida and South Carolina. What can you tell us about those calls?
Well, Cynthia, the bottom line message from this president to both of those governors, both Republican governors, is that the federal government is prepared to do whatever it takes for as long as it takes, regardless, and actually above politics. Here's part of his message earlier today.
I've directed that every possible action be taken to save lives and get help to survivors, because every single minute counts. It's not just a crisis for Florida. This is an American crisis. We're all in this together.
So the president's conversation with Governor DeSantis was his third in the last 2 days, obviously after now as the governor with his FEMA administrator in Florida now begins to assess the damage, but also his first with Governor McMaster in South Carolina, as of course we see Ian bearing down on the state just now.
You know, Governor DeSantis had famously voted against aid to New York during Hurricane Sandy. It's an interesting twist of events. What are some of the other actions that the White House has taken over the last 24 hours, Mike?
Well, when we heard from the president just in the last hour, we heard quite an exhaustive list from him about what kind of federal resources are available. Some 2,000 federal personnel, in fact, have been deployed to Florida to aid with their response. More on the way. They've pre-positioned a number of federal responders in South Carolina as well. I thought some of the most interesting ones really reflect the modern era, the modern fact of disaster response now. They have what are called cells on wheels. They call them cows, Cynthia. That's really part of an effort to bring broadband and cellular service to some of these hard-hit areas, not just for the individuals on the ground who need that kind of communication, but also to help with that disaster response. Federal officials need that as well.
Well, I never heard of the cow term before, but thank you for that, Mike, from the White House. Mike Memoli. We continue to follow breaking news. Hurricane Ian making a second landfall. Right now, more NBC News Daily right after this.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves.
You can actually see they're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Can you tell us what it was like? Our NBC News exclusive. From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now. Allie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Our show is about sparking conversations around today's biggest issues. The Fed raises interest rates. That controls inflation. Explain how that works. Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs and their relationship to their employers? Could you just remind us why there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court instead of 3 or 20 or 2? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Hey, podcast fans, ready to unlock our true crime mysteries? Try Dateline Premium on Apple Podcasts. You'll get early access to originals, plus bonus content, and everything is ad-free. So head to Apple Podcasts now to subscribe.
Breaking right now, we are tracking Hurricane Ian for you. It officially made landfall, a second landfall, as a Category 1 storm in South Carolina. In Georgetown is where the National Hurricane Center is putting that landfall. Joining us now is the Sheriff of Charleston County, South Carolina, Kristen Graziano. And Sheriff, we appreciate you making some time for us today. If my geography is right, the landfall was in Georgetown. Your county touches Georgetown County there in South Carolina as well. So you saw, your county felt some of the worst of what this was coming ashore. Talk to us about what your deputies are dealing with, what you're seeing, what you know is happening as this landfall is happening in South Carolina.
Right. Thanks for having us. I first want to offer our prayers and thoughts and prayers to our neighbors and our friends to the south in Florida, who really are suffering devastating effects from what Ian has brought. We luckily have not had those effects. We've been very fortunate. In fact, the governor just tweeted out a few minutes ago that our prayers have been answered. And I know as far as Charleston goes, that's probably true, but not so much to the north. I think that the landfall just occurred in Pawleys Island area, just to our north in Georgetown. So they're still feeling it. But right now our winds went from about 62 miles an hour sustained, and they're down to about 25 miles per hour sustained. So we're on the backside of this, and so far so good.
You know, as you were getting ready for this, we saw a tweet that your office sent out saying that deputies had been sheltering in place because of the weather conditions. They were asking, obviously you're asking people to stay inside until things were more clear. Was there a point at which it was too dangerous for your officers to be able to respond to emergencies? And what's the status of that order at this point?
Yes, absolutely. Once the winds reach a certain sustained winds, they close the bridges at 39 miles per hour. But beyond that, it gets too dangerous for our deputies to go out in the field to perform any kind of services and rescues because of the falling tree limbs, the falling power lines. We have widespread outages right now. As of about 15 minutes ago, we have released the west and the south deputies. Now they are now answering calls that were backed up, and they're assessing the damage as we speak. As for the north and east, we're still holding them because the winds are still strong to our north, as well as a little bit to the east, up towards Georgetown and Pawleys Island.
You mentioned your deputies are helping with the calls for service that had been backed up now. We saw a video of roads that had been more than flooded, not just a little bit of water on the roads, but some places where there was high water. We saw emergency vehicles driving through water that was above the tires on some of the larger trucks out there. What are the calls like that you're getting now? What are these deputies now having to go out and do in the lower parts of Charleston County?
You know, we've been very fortunate not to have the water that we normally get here. It rains here and we get water in the road. It's called the Low Country for a reason, but we have been very fortunate that water and the circulation of the storm has pushed that water away from us. And it's going towards the north now, north area up towards Myrtle Beach. So we've been very fortunate, but most of what we're seeing, down power lines, trees, tree limbs, trees across the road where people are getting in their car and running into these trees, not seeing them. And what we fear the most are these really heavy, big oak trees that we have, these grand oak trees. The ground is really, really saturated, and a good gust of wind can uproot one of those trees, and it's going to take down anything in its path. So that's one thing we're really keeping our eye on. Again, our guys to the south and to the west are assessing those damages. And the roadways as well. And right now we don't have a lot of flooding but mostly just obstructions in the roadway.
So I'll ask you just last thing here. For folks who are thinking, okay, well, the storm's passing, things are drying out, we can get out now. Do you think that's okay, or what would your advice be to folks who are ready to venture out for any reason?
People do get antsy and they want to go out and see the damage, and sometimes the calls we get are because they're going out too soon, and they'll get hit with a tree limb or a power line or flying debris. We're still having gusts in excess of 45 miles per hour. Sustained winds are down below 24, 25 miles per hour, which is not abnormal, but there's still a lot of debris flying around. And we just ask that people stay put for now. Let us do what we need to do to make it safe. That's our job. And we'll keep conveying the message as the roads get safer and as the waters recede.
Sheriff, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We're going to continue to follow this breaking news. Hurricane Ian making a second landfall in South Carolina.
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves.
They're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Hey, podcast fans, ready to unlock our true crime mysteries? Try Dateline Premium on Apple Podcasts. You'll get early access to originals, plus bonus content, and everything is ad-free. So head to Apple Podcasts now to subscribe.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves.
You can actually see they're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Hey, podcast fans, ready to unlock our true crime mysteries? Try Dateline Premium on Apple Podcasts. You'll get early access to originals, plus bonus content, and everything is ad-free. So head to Apple Podcasts now to subscribe.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
For Dateline Premium, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts.
A live look at Hurricane Ian for you here, hitting South Carolina as we speak. Millions across Florida, though, are still without electricity today after this storm made landfall with winds at 150 miles per hour sustained, a Category 4 storm yesterday. We want to bring in Weather Nation field correspondent Ben McMillan now. He's in LaBelle, Florida, near Fort Myers today. Ben, obviously the sun is back out where you are, which we like to see in Florida, except that now we know it's revealing just an ugly, horrible scene there. Talk to us a little bit about the search and rescue efforts as you understand them and what the needs are today.
Well, first, let me tell you about our race to obtain resources. We're here in LaBelle, and you can see the fuel line stretches for miles, and that's been the challenge of the day, trying to find working fuel, power, and water, and it's been extremely difficult. These fuel lines go for miles, and this is just one of the very few stations left open in town. And then you mentioned about going back and looking at the storm itself. The power of storms are just something I will not forget for a very long time. We had some video we obtained from a couple in Bonita Springs, Florida, Rachel and Greg Stout, of the storm surge impacting their front door and surrounding their house. They said it was the most scary moments of their life to see their house just hit by all the power of water. Their neighbor's garage exploded and their possessions washed out right into the driveway and got whisked away by the water. Yeah. And that's one of the better scenarios. Fort Myers, obviously, we know there's entire buildings washed away, some with people in them. Some sad things point out is we're starting to see the totality of this disaster across the state of Florida.
So, Ben, we're seeing on the screen some live shots from Sanibel Island, which are just extraordinary. It's just devastation. It looks like just tinder, mile after mile of just utter devastation. We know that the temperature is going up. It's hot. It's supposed to get almost to 90 over the weekend. No power, as you're talking about, just the fuel problems. What is your advice to people as they start to return to their homes? Those who can, I don't think anyone's going to be going to Sanibel too soon, but you're in LaBelle, which is just near Fort Myers. Give us that piece of advice.
Wait for officials to complete their search and rescue process. We were in Bonita Springs and people were still being carried out by vehicles on the backs of pickup trucks. Anything with four-wheel drive, it's kind of a race to get people, especially the elderly, to better conditions before they start to develop health problems or worse. And sometimes we see more injuries and fatalities post-storm because of the lack of care for these people on the ground here.
Ben McMillan, our thanks to you. And early estimates predict Hurricane Ian could be Florida's costliest storm since the early 1990s.
And so if you've been impacted, what are some of the steps you can take to financially recover from this sort of thing? Here's CNBC's Sharon Epperson.
The best way to recover from a disaster is to be prepared going into it. But few people are completely prepared for a disaster. So these are the steps to take right now. I reached out to Carolyn McClanahan, who is on the CNBC Financial Advisor Council and was herself without power in the storm in Florida. Of course, she was prepared with plenty of food and water and cash on hand, but her advice, apply for disaster assistance as soon as possible. With more than 1 million homes along the Gulf affected, it can take time to get you the help that you need. FEMA, Red Cross, and resources from state and local government will also be helpful. If you have a mortgage or other loans you can't pay, call the provider right away to ask for help and call your insurance agent immediately to initiate a claim. Now, as you prepare your claim, you need to make sure that for the inventory damage, before you start cleaning up, making temporary repairs or other things to prevent further damage, make sure you're taking a strategic inventory, videotape, also, of course, photos, but don't do any permanent repairs until you've gotten approval for reimbursement from your insurance company. And keep a written record of everyone that you talk to about your insurance claim, including the date of the conversation, summary of what was said. Keep all the receipts for everything involved in trying to recover from and clean up from this disaster. Now, for Florida consumers who are looking ahead to the future, it's going to be hard to find homeowners insurance, property insurance. It was a tough market before this hurricane, experts say. And so for consumers, many will now be facing even higher premiums and deductibles. And some may have to find a new insurance company if theirs pulls out. Back to you.
All right, our thanks to Sharon there. We're going to continue to follow this breaking news. Hurricane Ian making that second landfall in South Carolina. I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
I'm Cynthia McFadden. You're watching NBC News Daily.
Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves.
They're pushing the gates open.
Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top story with Tom Yamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that.
Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
For Dateline Premium, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now. the day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Hey, podcast fans, ready to unlock our true crime mysteries? Try Dateline Premium on Apple Podcasts. You'll get early access to originals, plus bonus content, and everything is ad-free. So head to Apple Podcasts now to subscribe. Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
And I'm Cynthia McFadden in for Kate Snow. NBC News Daily starts right now.
Today, Friday, September 30th, 2022. Second strike. Hurricane Ian makes another landfall, this time slamming into South Carolina. Millions of Americans in the storm's path. We're live on the ground with complete coverage.
Utter devastation, startling new images out of Florida revealing the full extent of Ian's wrath. The urgent search and rescue missions intensify with time running out.
And desperate for power, days after the storm hit, millions across Florida are still in the dark. The frantic effort underway now to get service restored to those who need it most.
We begin with Hurricane Ian now battering coastal South Carolina.
Yeah, that storm made a second landfall in the past hour or so, this time as a Category 1 hurricane. It is bringing life-threatening storm surge and dangerous winds in some places. Flooding, power outages, two of the biggest concerns for South Carolina right now.
In southwest Florida, people are only beginning to survey the damage from Wednesday's direct hit. We now know there are at least 14 confirmed deaths associated with Ian, according to local officials in Florida. At least 700 rescues have been carried out across the state.
Now, we want to show you these new live pictures coming in from Sanibel Island. Actually, I think, there we go. Here are the live pictures we're getting from Sanibel. Now, this is a community devastated. Doesn't even begin to describe really what we're seeing as we've been able to look up and down this island in particular. There are lots of other barrier islands there with just as much damage. These are some of the clearest pictures yet, though, of the impact this storm has had there. People on Sanibel Island are still not able to leave because the only road to the mainland of Florida has been severed. They've been doing airlifts to the extent possible throughout the day today. Meteorologist Bill Cairns has updated the track for us. He and Steve Patterson are joining us. Steve's in Florida. We want to start with Kathy Park, though, as we're dealing with what's happening in South Carolina. She's in Charleston today, just south of where this storm made landfall. So, Kathy, this thing has been changing a lot. It seems almost by the minute there as we've been watching it come ashore. What are the conditions like now in and around Charleston where you are?
Hey there, Aaron. Yeah, the conditions have changed dramatically, I want to say, in the past hour since we last spoke. And dare I say it, I think I see the sky is actually clearing, but we're still seeing these powerful wind gusts picking up at times, but the rain has stopped. And just kind of looking around here, we are seeing a little bit of ponding, some localized flooding where we are, but the big headline seems to be just kind of the debris, the palm fronds, the branches that are kind of scattered all across the ground here. Behind me is the Ashley River, and this is some sawgrass, and you can kind of see just it shaking in the background here. And over there behind me is the marina. And throughout the day, we've been kind of watching, keeping a close eye on all the boats, and we didn't really see anything crazy happening. We saw, some wobbling going around, and over there, the bridge, it looks like some cars are kind of passing through here now that things are starting to clear up. But you nailed it. I mean, the conditions have really kind of changed throughout the course of the day. Early on this morning when we were bracing for impact, we were hit with strong wind gusts, really heavy bands of rain, downpours, but here we are now. Things are starting to clear up, and it looks like the water is slowly starting to recede.
Kathy, it's nice to see boats sitting upright in the water as opposed to all of that devastation in Florida. What's the local government's guidance to people who are still in the area? What are they telling them now?
Yeah, so, it kind of depends on where you are. So we are getting reports that portions of the downtown area, there's flooding, but kind of people were prepared for this. That downtown area here in Charleston, it's a low-lying area, so even on a good day, when there is high tide, flooding is not out of the question. We're also seeing reports of outages. That number is in the tens of thousands at this point, but we do want to stress that this area not out of the woods just yet. As you can kind of see, the wind gusts have not subsided just yet. Flash flooding is still a concern as we go through the night. In fact, there is a warning in place until about 5 o'clock tonight. But early on in the day, the conditions were so bad. EMS workers, even police officers had to hunker down, shelter in place until conditions improved. But it looks like conditions are certainly improving at this hour.
Good, some good news. Kathy Parks, thank you so much.
All right, let's bring in NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns. And I should first apologize. I think earlier we were showing some live pictures. I said it was Sanibel. It was actually Fort Myers Beach. So just want to clear that up. Bill, but you're still tracking this storm because it's still a big storm that's still on the move. What's the latest?
We're want to watch it weaken quickly. I mean, you can tell by our reporters, if you've been following the story throughout the day, the sun's probably going to set in areas like Charleston later on this afternoon. The rain's almost done. I mean, they only have a little bit of rain left. So if something hasn't flooded yet from the heavy rainfall, probably won't. And that's assuming you're away from like small rivers or streams. So the heaviest rains is all the way back up here inland now, off of areas like Orangeburg and up towards Columbia. And as we were saying, at the same time we're tracking this storm moving into South Carolina, we are still getting surveys and aerial pictures. This is Fort Myers Beach area. You can see these just rows of homes, and this looks like a mobile home park. And yeah, mobile home parks are no match for a storm surge. They're going to have trouble figuring out whose mobile home was whose at some point. It's stuff's just moved all over the place. And yeah, this is, we keep mentioning Fort Myers Beach area and Fort Myers. Cape Coral's literally across the bay from Fort Myers, and they're in the same boat, too, as this region. You get to see all the debris there and how high the water got and the wave action on top of that. So you get the water that will float stuff, and then you get the waves tearing it apart on top. So, yeah, just dramatic pictures after dramatic pictures. That's the difference, by the way. Later, we'll be showing you pictures of what happened in South Carolina, and you'll see some damage, some trees down. You maybe see some houses that had some water in them, but you won't see anything like Southwest Florida. There's a huge difference between a Category 1 and a Category 4 storm. And, boats, they weren't going to stay moored no matter how well they were tied down in this storm. And obviously, they just float right in with the storm surge. It's kind of it's a good gauge of how far inland the storm surge went. Often, when you have these hurricanes, you just can look and see how far the boat was left into the woods or into the trees or however far on shore that they left. So, yeah, dramatic scenes there. So let me just finish up the forecast, just give you the latest. As far as the wind gusts go, these will come down. It will probably only be a hurricane maybe for another couple hours, and then likely a tropical storm, or we'll call it a post-hurricane, post-tropical cyclone, I should say, would be the official terminology. As the heavy rain continues, that's really our biggest threat, is just what's going to happen with the rain, and also if we get any tornadoes later today. Those are the two life-threatening things that Ian could still produce. So this will be the end of its hurricane life, and then turning into just a big old rainstorm. Hurricane Center does have a chance of that heavy rain all the way into West Virginia with flash flood watches, and including all of eastern North Carolina, guys. So, obviously we're going to continue to focus on what this storm will still do, but at the same time, that cleanup effort and that story is going to continue, and the stories we hear out of Southwest Florida, there's just a huge difference between. That's why we have categories. That's why you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to give you a scope of what the damage will be, and you can see the difference between a 4 and a 1.
Yeah. All right, Bill Cairns for us today. Bill, thank you.
Well, here is a bird's eye view of just some of the devastation in Fort Myers, Florida. The mayor there is calling Ian one of the most ferocious storms he's witnessed in decades. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is in Fort Myers. Steve, give us a sense of the destruction you're seeing. I mean, the pictures from the air are just astounding.
just as astounding on the ground, Cynthia. I mean, you're talking about wreckage really as far as the eye can see in every direction. You know, you look to my right, you'll see the sea, which is completely docked up, the dock, completely ripped up. To my left is the highway. Traffic's running through. You know, security trucks are rolling through, police are rolling through, utility trucks are rolling through. So help is here, and people are trying to help as I make my way through some of this wreckage, which is just unbelievable. But on the other side of that traffic are the boats that should be in the marina. They're tore up, and we're not talking about just little pontoon boats or jet skis. We're talking about yachts and barges, all shoved up alongside there. Meanwhile, I mean, just surveying the damage here, you can't walk without stepping on a power line or a piece of concrete that has been ripped up or remnants of people's lives that will never be the same. And that's the heartbreaking thing when you walk through a scene like this. Yeah, Cynthia.
Well, that's what I was going to say to you, Steve. You know, we can see the broken things, but I mean, every broken thing is representing someone's life that's been broken apart too. I mean, these are businesses, these are homes, these are, you know, retirement places where people have spent their whole lives to make it to this point and now destroyed. I mean, what have the people you've been talking to been telling you?
So I spoke to two women, and they had just gotten back. That's what you'll find in town right now. This traffic wasn't flowing through like this. I can't show it to you right now, obviously, but it's flowing through town in a way in which it hasn't before. That means people are coming back to see parts of their lives that they haven't seen like this ever before and never will again. Two ladies I spoke to, they were just on the other side of what this business is, which is basically just like the bait shop and a tiki bar. They had a boat on the water here. They had two boats. One, they said, was overneath on that dock. The other one, they said, was in pieces, scattered around here. They had found it, you know, scattered there and scattered here and scattered there. Heartbroken, but obviously it wasn't a piece of their property. I think when we get deeper in, when we start discovering people that lost everything, that's when it's going to settle in about how terrible this was. And people have lost everything, Cynthia.
Boy, it's a hard place to be standing. Steve Patterson, we thank you for that. Ian is expected to be Florida's costliest storm since 1992, and many people are likely to struggle to recover financially.
CNBC's Kate Rooney joins us now for today's Money Minute. Hey, Kate.
Hi there, Aaron. That's right. Earlier this week, oil prices were higher as the storms shut down some production in the Gulf of Mexico. Today, they're lower, in part due to concerns the storm will reduce economic activity in the southeast, which in turn would reduce the demand for oil. Insured losses from the storm are expected to be somewhere between $25 and $40 billion, making it likely that Ian will be the most expensive U.S. hurricane since 1992. But industry experts say the country's big property casualty insurers will be able to absorb those losses. And if you've suffered any losses from the storm, CNBC personal finance correspondent Sharon Epperson recommends applying for disaster assistance as soon as possible, contacting your lenders and calling your insurance agent immediately. Cynthia and Aaron, back to you.
All right, CNBC's Kate Rooney for us. Thank you, Kate. Our coverage of Hurricane Ian continues after the break here. That storm making that second landfall just after 2 p.m. Eastern in South Carolina. You're watching NBC News Daily. Right now on NBC News Now,
we begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers. Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism? Do you think this could have happened without social media?
We're coming on the air with the news, NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern?
Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern?
Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
A masked killer takes aim and fires. A fatal attraction that leads investigators to turn towards their own. Internal Affairs, a new podcast from Dateline. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts. Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern?
Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Parts of Florida still underwater this afternoon, but the areas where the floodwaters are beginning to recede in the eastern part of the state, well, the scope of Hurricane Ian's damage is becoming clearer. NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch is in Orlando for us today. That saw some pretty catastrophic flooding there in Orlando. And Jesse, talk to us about the damage left behind, the cleanup operation, and that's a ton of water still on the ground behind you.
Yeah, and Aaron, for context, the worst of Ian here was yesterday morning. It has been dry all day today. It was dry for much of yesterday afternoon and evening. And as you just mentioned, you can see behind me, this neighborhood is still partially underwater. And I'm going to have our photographer push in behind me on a basketball hoop. We know that the rim should be about 10 feet high, so that gives you an idea of how deep the waters are here. And the added twist of floodwaters in a place like where I am in Orlando is that there's the potential for alligators to be in these waters. And we have, in fact, seen an alligator repeatedly swimming through here today, including not far from where we saw some people wading through the water earlier. We gave them a shout and they turned around and hopefully they made it out safely. But just gives you an idea of one of the threats people have to contend with here. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would you go into these waters? Well, of course, people left things behind, including this group of women we spoke with who live in the home just behind me here. And they said that they were able to evacuate, get to safety, but they had to leave their pet behind. They say, thankfully, that pet rabbit has now been saved. Obviously, though, they're trying to see what else is left here, Aaron.
You know, it makes me nervous a little bit having you on the edge of this water, knowing that there could be some reptiles back there, Jesse. But we appreciate the work you're doing. I know your crew is helping you keep an eye out for things there. I do want to ask you what you're hearing from people, though. The governor in that state said this was a 500-year flood event. You've spoken to some folks. What are they telling you about their experiences?
Yeah, and I will stress that we have eyes on the waters here, and I appreciate your concern, Aaron. Well, one of the women we spoke with earlier said that she went through Hurricane Irma here, and that this is worse than that for a comparison point. And that's one of the reasons that they quickly made the choice to evacuate. They didn't want to linger for that. Here's what one other resident told me.
There's a medical center just up the road here. Their vehicles all underwater. The medical facility underwater. And that's the first time that I've seen it that bad. Irma wasn't this bad. This, really bad.
And according to officials, the latest tally we have is almost 27,000 customers still in the dark, Aaron, but hopefully those numbers keep going down because it's getting hotter and people will want that AC, Aaron.
Yeah, especially in that area. Jesse Kirsch for us in Orlando today. Thank you, Jesse.
Well, in fact, power outages are causing a major concern all over the state of Florida. More than 1.8 million people are without power across the state right now. I want to bring in Melissa Sexas, who is Duke Energy's state president in Florida. Melissa, how many of your customers are currently without power?
Well, I'll start with letting you know how many customers we have restored. And as of this afternoon, Afternoon, we've restored nearly 700,000 customers of our 1.2 million that we serve in 35 counties. Currently, we have about 422,000 customers without service, ranging from the Tampa Bay area over into Central Florida. But we are making very good progress on restoration today.
Yeah, that's that's remarkable, 700,000 in that first 24-hour period. So there were about 400,000 remaining, you're saying. What's the timeline look like for those folks?
So we have communicated our estimated time of restoration. We've broken the geography into kind of 3 areas, one in the Tampa Bay area, which we will have those customers on by tomorrow night, 90% of them on by tomorrow night, which is Saturday, October 1st. In areas like where your reporter was, in Orange and Seminole, we will restore about 90% of those customers by midnight Saturday, October 2nd. And then later today, in our hardest hit areas, we will report what our estimated time of restoration is. We are still completing some of that damage assessment, as your reporter showed. As your reporter had shown, it was flooding has created some complications there.
Well, we thank you so much for what you and your company are doing for the residents down there. Melissa Satius, our thanks.
Much more ahead here on NBC News Daily. Stay with us.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Stay on top of breaking news and the biggest stories of the day with NBC News Daily.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Morgan Radford.
And I'm Vicki Wynn.
I'm Aaron Gilchrist.
And I'm Kate Snow.
Get in-depth reporting from across the country.
What's your reaction to the president's comments?
And around the world.
Are Ukrainians continuing to make advances?
And ways you can take care of your health.
Who should be getting tested? And frankly, how often?
And your wallet.
Costs are skyrocketing. How to manage soaring prices.
NBC News Daily. Weekdays from 12 to 4 p.m. Eastern on NBC News Now.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now. Streaming weekdays at 7.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
A masked killer takes aim and fires. A fatal attraction that leads investigators to turn towards their own. Internal Affairs, a new podcast from Dateline. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
NBC News, streaming free now.
Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now. Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now. For Dateline Premium, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts.
Welcome back. Survival stories in the aftermath of Hurricane Ian. Here's MSNBC's Jose Diaz-Balart.
Fort Myers Beach here was one of the areas hardest hit by Hurricane Ian when it struck southwest Florida at 150 miles an hour right in this area. And I just want to show you just the strength and the violence of this storm. This structure and this structure were actually on the other side, closer to a marina. And this 50-foot yacht came from the marina crossed over, and landed on that SUV. The alarms are still going off at this hour. But so many people lost so much here. I just spoke with the Gutierrez family. They were at home, father, mother, 4 children, when the storm hit. And their house literally shook from its foundations before coming tumbling down. Here's the conversation with the Gutierrez.
We were calm in our house until 1 p.m. At 2:30 or more or less, we came out and the winds, all the water, because the water was inside our house, and we opened the door and all the water came in. ¿Cuánta agua? How much water? ¿Cómo se describiría eso? What, like 3 or 4 feet of water just came right in. And we ran out, my children and I holding hands, and we came to a house that had a second floor. And a laundry. Y esto durante el tiempo que el viento estaba en su apogeo. This is at the wind was at its strongest. In the water, we were being moved left and right, and it was we couldn't even. It was we sometimes lost our grip, but we were able to grab onto each other once again. And we got to that, thank God, to that 2-story structure that had, and we went to a laundry, and we were there 5 hours there, just with panic, because the water kept coming up and and we were crying and really, really ugly, so horrible. And the house almost fell. It opened up. Almost the foundation came up. It all got destroyed, cut, and we lost everything. We're with not one single thing. What was that like when you stepped out?
Like focus on where we had to go. And just kind of like go by and not think of what was around.
Did you fear for the worst?
At some point, I did, like when I stepped out, but I had to pull myself together and get through it.
Señora, lo más difícil es esto, ¿no?
Sí.
Yes.
He
was crying, Mommy, don't let me die. Pero ve que salieron de esa. Dios los protegió.
Demasiado nos protegió Dios.
God protected us. God protected us.
They lost everything. Everything they had worked for, everything they had was lost at that house. And what they're doing today is they're living with friends. Their friends also had their house affected. No power, windows blown out, but at least there's a roof over their head. And the father today is out looking for work, looking for a job, starting over, they said. Back to you.
We're here to start conversations about the big things happening in our world, because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Allie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
And what do you love about fatherhood?
The chaos, the learning. Is climate change one of your top priorities?
What's your message to girls who want to make a difference in their own communities?
Believe in yourself.
Our show is about sparking conversations around today's biggest issues. The Fed raises interest rates. That controls inflation. Explain how that works. Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs and their relationship to their employers? Could you just remind us why there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court instead of 3 or 20 or 2? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand.
Ukraine and Russia. Could you help me understand what's going on?
So to help make sense of it all, we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Bottom of the hour now, we want to bring you up to speed on Hurricane Ian.
The storm officially making landfall in South Carolina just after 2 p.m. Eastern as a Category 1 hurricane, bringing heavy rain and knocking out power to thousands along the coast.
And we are also watching the long cleanup that's just beginning, really, in Florida. This is video from Naples, which was hit hard by incredible flooding there, an incredible storm surge that they saw in that city. Meteorologist Bill Cairns has been tracking Ian, obviously, for days now. He's joining us now because, actually, we're going to talk to Bill in a second here. Let's actually go to Kathy Park first. She is in South Carolina for us today, where she's been posted for the storm as it came ashore there. Kathy, we saw the heavy rain and the wind that were really a big problem in Charleston and the areas around it. Talk to us about where things stand right now as you've been outside in the conditions there.
Yeah, Aaron, so the conditions here have improved dramatically. If you asked me maybe about 2 hours ago, things were pretty hairy, to say the least. I actually lost my first hat because the wind really picked up. We were also pounded by heavy bands of rain. But when you look around now, I mean, it just looks like a dreary day here. Hard to believe that a Cat 1 hurricane was nearing landfall here in Charleston. Behind me is the Ashley River, and the water is now starting to recede. At one point, we were very concerned that this storm was going to make landfall in the noon hour, right around the same time as high tide. And also there was that storm surge warning that was in effect. So we were very worried that all these things would potentially come together and lead to widespread flooding. But speaking of flooding, we are hearing reports of flooding in the downtown Charleston area. But flash flooding is still a concern as we kind of move toward the evening hours. So right now, this is kind of what we're seeing. A lot of the debris scattered around the ground. You see tree branches, palm fronds, but, you know, some of the ponding, the pooling that we saw in the parking lot in front of me, a lot of it has drained away. So conditions have improved dramatically, and it looks like this storm is pulling on out of here. Aaron?
All right, Kathy Park for us in Charleston today. Kathy, thanks.
Well, we're going to bring in meteorologist Bill Cairns now. Bill, what can we expect as Ian starts to move inland tonight?
We can expect the threats to change, and they already are. The winds will be coming down everywhere. We'll see less trees falling, so that threat will begin to decline. The storm surge has peaked in almost all areas, so that threat is declining. And then we're still have to watch the chances of flash flooding and isolated tornadoes. So that threat's actually going to go up as we get this storm moving inland. And the rain is almost completely over with, from Charleston to Georgetown, even Myrtle Beach. So it's just, again, I was telling you all day long, There's nothing on the backside of this storm. Once it goes past you, the winds will quickly die off and the rain will just about be over with. Everything's on the north side. So it's still pretty windy. I'm sure we got some power outages and tree problems in the Fayetteville area. We just had a gust of 54. Florence is at 49. So you can see where these higher gusts are away from the center, heading now into areas of the upstate of South Carolina and in the central portions of North Carolina. It's not even that windy in areas of eastern North Carolina. But again, the concern there will be if we get any isolated tornadoes. So here's a big picture of the radar. And it's these storms coming in off the coast. That's why we have the tornado watch that is up until 10 o'clock this evening. And it looks like we actually do have one tornado warning right here heading towards the Washington, North Carolina area. So we got the Albemarle and the Pamlico Sounds here in the Neuse River. So we'll watch that area, take a look at that, make sure we don't have anything too bad. But that's a heads up for that area to watch that storm. And then as we go throughout tonight, this storm will head northwards, bringing a lot of rain with it. It's not going to be a fun drive for anyone on I-95 heading from D.C. southwards through Richmond and into areas of North Carolina. And for that matter, if you want to head down towards Williamsburg and Norfolk, too, it's going to be kind of windy at times and then a lot of rain, and that's the concern. The forecast track from the Hurricane Center, it'll be interesting to see if they keep this Category 1 hurricane. Maybe they'll call it a tropical storm, or they may just drop this all together to what we call a remnant low as we go throughout the evening tonight, a post-tropical system. And then it's going to head into central North Carolina and then Virginia, and then it's completely dissipated and just a little bit of a rainmaker towards West Virginia by the time we get to Sunday. So the big threat right now is water. Flash flood warnings in the Norfolk area. We have flash flood warnings on the north side of the Albemarle Sound. And we also have a couple areas here near New Bern. We have flash flood warnings not far from the Myrtle Beach area. It looks like at the beaches, those flash flood warnings have been dropped as the tide is now taking out that storm surge. And there's, as Kathy was just mentioning, Charleston is under a flash flood warning right now. So again, the timing of this, the worst is just about over with on the coast, but now we're going to watch the inland concerns.
Bill Cairns, thanks for that. Let's bring in Joe Coates, the Director of Charleston County Emergency Management. Thanks for joining us. So Charleston County had some time to prepare for this hurricane. What would you say the status of everything is right at the moment as you assess it?
So right now we're assessing the damage that we received. We still have a good bit of flooding downtown, and then our barrier islands as well that have received a good bit of flooding. So at this point in time, we've got first responders out doing windshield surveys and just trying to assess what type of damage we've received.
Yeah, it's still too early to know everything, of course. Is your EMS operation back in business? I know it had been temporarily suspended.
Yeah, so when the winds reach a certain threshold, then we pull all of our first responders off of the road. But EMS is running again, and most all of our first responding agencies are all back in commission.
Do you feel like you ducked a bullet here, or too early to say?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I said, did you duck a bullet here, or is it too early to say?
Yes, we definitely did. We still have a good bit of damage and pulling trees off of roads. But yes, the brunt of it definitely went to our neighbors to the north of Georgetown. So our hearts and prayers are out with them as well as those in the Florida area that were hit.
Joe Coates, we thank you for being with us, and we are happy to hear that things are coming back, or will soon be coming back to normal down there.
The story in Florida, though, is still a really difficult one. People in Fort Myers, for example, are facing hard days ahead of them as they start to try to assess the scale of all the destruction that's happened as a result of Hurricane Ian there. Several homes have been destroyed. Several really doesn't I think, get at what the reality is on the ground there, as we'll find it. Fishing and charter boats have been smashed and scattered all over the place. The devastation stretching mile after mile after mile. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson is in Fort Myers for us today. He's been trying to help us understand the degree to which things have been destroyed there. People, Steve, are only beginning to really process what has happened to their homes and their businesses there. Have you had a chance to speak to many people at this point?
I haven't yet. The people that I have spoken to, though, as you can imagine, are devastated and bewildered, and I think just as stunned as I am. Most of what I'm seeing, it's hard to tell what it is. And Cynthia made this great point about some of the items that you see in the wreckage. Those belong to people. You know, that is part of somebody's life. The problem is, most of what I see, I can't even describe to you. I don't know where the first house ends into the next business, into the next house. And we're not that deep into town, right? I mean, we're basically at the marina because we want to tell you about some of these barrier islands that, you know, are obviously cut off from the rest of civilization. But when we do see something that we do recognize, it's that much more powerful. And one of those things is to my left shoulder. There are a lot of news crews here, so if you see those, don't mind it. But everybody's here for one reason. This structure is incredible. This is basically it was the bait shop and the marina shop and a tiki bar. But up there you can see a shower. That is not a roof. That was somebody's second floor up there. So some of those items, the washer, dryer, the shower, just personal items that belong to somebody. That person is here, by the way. We've seen him sitting in there. One of my missions is to go and talk to him when it looks like he's not completely devastated. But that scene, I would imagine, is so typical, besides just the soup of damage that covers this entire town. Guys, back to you.
You know, it's mind-blowing to think about what you're seeing there, Steve. I do want to ask you, you mentioned the barrier islands. Sanibel Island in particular is one that we've been getting a lot of images from, not far from where you are right now. The mayor there today said that the recovery is going to be a long-term effort for them. Can you give us a sense of the scope of the damage on that particular island and anything you might know about other barrier islands there?
Yeah, long-term because their access is completely cut off. That channel bridge is gone, essentially, at least large segments of it, so they cannot get people along the ground to that island, which means they can't transport people off without either a boat or a helicopter. So that's multiple trips, and we've been hearing these helicopters every few seconds or so. I can't tell you what exactly the assessment of the scope of the devastation, because I don't think anybody can. If you're not able to rescue everybody off of an island, there's no way you're able to get assessors in there at this point. What I can tell you is that it is bad. It is terrible, of course. From what we've seen from the air, it looks devastating. And imagine that while being trapped, waiting for rescue, no power, maybe no shelter in some cases, or just a basic one, and you're just waiting on the next chopper. It must be incredibly difficult for people that are stuck there, if not life-threatening. So that is something that I know is ongoing as we speak. Aaron.
All right, Steve Patterson in Fort Myers. We appreciate your reporting, Steve. Thank you.
President Biden is directing his administration to prioritize quote, life-saving actions as the federal response to Ian's aftermath continues to grow. NBC White House correspondent Mike Memoli joins us from Washington. Mike, we've heard from President Biden. Can you tell us a little bit more about his conversations with the governors in both South Carolina and Florida?
Yes, Cynthia. The president's spoken not just to the governors of those states, but some of the local elected officials and also some of those first responders who are dealing with this crisis in real time. And based on what he's been hearing from them, he offered a frank assessment of what the country is dealing with now. Take a listen to what the president had to say earlier.
The situation in Florida is far more devastating. We're just beginning to see the scale of that destruction. It's likely to rank among the worst of the nation's and the worst in the nation's history. I just want the people of Florida to know we see what you're going through and we're with you.
So this is going to be a long-term recovery effort involving the federal government. And in fact, Congress, before it left town ahead of the midterm elections today, passed some funding for this disaster relief. The president says he's going to sign that into law as quickly as he can.
So, Mike, what are some of the other actions the White House has been taking over the last 24 hours? You told me something earlier about cows.
There's cows. Those are cells on wheels. That's an effort to bring sort of mobile telephone service into the region. There's also colts. Those are cell on light towers. That's another version of the same thing. But Cynthia, there's really a full-throated response here that involves more than 2,000 federal personnel. That includes the Army Corps of Engineers, who's really taking a close look at the infrastructure needs that are just being revealed at this point, and some of what the federal government can ultimately do long-term to help respond.
Very critical. Mike Memoli, as always, thank you for being at the White House for us.
Our coverage continues here in just a moment. We're going to take you inside a community in Florida that seemingly has been washed away. There is much more to come on NBC News Daily.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
Our show is about sparking conversations around today's biggest issues. The Fed raises interest rates. That controls inflation. Explain how that works. Is part of this that everyone's rethinking their jobs and their relationship to their employers? Could you just remind us why there are 9 justices on the Supreme Court instead of 3 or 20 or 2? It's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Live from Ukraine, from Uvalde, Texas, from Mayfield, Kentucky. To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. You can actually see they're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told. No. Do you remember any tornado as bad as this one? You look at this and you're thinking, we're not going to have power for weeks, if not months.
Exactly.
Every night, it's your news playlist.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Right now on NBC News Now,
We begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers. Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism? Do you think this could have happened without social media?
We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Top Story with Tom Llamas, weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
As Hurricane Ian made its second landfall in South Carolina, people in Florida are starting to assess the damage. NBC News correspondent Valerie Castro takes us inside a small village now washed away.
Just widespread, complete destruction.
Matlacha, Florida is unrecognizable even to the people who live here. The small community left obliterated by Hurricane Ian.
It was so much worse than we expected, so much worse than we thought could ever happen.
John Lynch has lived here for 25 years. He and his family evacuated from this 2-story home. His uncle did live here, just next door.
Like, that was a beautiful, beautiful little cottage. It really was. I've been here since 1946, and has been through many, many, many storms. So that was a shock.
Lynch's neighbor and friend decided to ride out the storm.
Yeah, it was rainy, it was scary, and it came fast. When the water came. It was one hell of a ride. By the time everybody around me wanted to go, it was too late. Might as well just ride it out.
Would you do it again?
No.
And he knows others did not survive that same decision to stay.
They pulled a couple dead bodies out this morning early. The Coast Guard had them. And unfortunately, someone else passed away on that side over there.
Everywhere you look, the island community is shattered, splintered, in some places completely swallowed up by the storm. Behind me, this is a roof that used to belong to a motel here. And as you walk around, there are just piles and piles of debris. It's not clear where everything exactly came from in the first place. And beyond me, those pilings, that used to be a restaurant called Bert's. It has been there since the 1920s, although as you can see, it's not there anymore. This is what Bert's used to look like. These guys rode out the storm in this boat. It turned out to be a safe enough place, the storm tossing it up on what's left of solid ground. But anyone who called this place home now left with little to come home to.
Valerie Castro reporting there. Joining us now is Andy Lianza, the Director of Emergency Management in Glynn County, Georgia. We appreciate you being with us today. And for our viewers, just to sort of help them get oriented, you're obviously a county on the coast of Georgia, includes Jekyll Island, if I'm not mistaken, which is a sort of a resort area that people will frequent and not far from the Florida-Georgia line. Talk to us about what things are like there for you today. We know so much of the coast had prepared for a major hurricane activity and tropical storm activity. Where do things stand now for you in Glenn County, Georgia?
We were blessed with this storm. At every turn, we were ready for a big impact, looking for the flooding in the normal places that we typically have it. But our chairman led us in prayer as we went into this storm, and I guess it worked because it's beautiful outside. There was not that many calls at all.
Yeah, obviously some great news for folks who live there in your county. I'm wondering, though, we know that there were issues in parts to the south of you, in Jacksonville and parts south, and then also up in South Carolina. With all the preparations that you made for your county, are you now in a position where you're trying to help others? How much of a mutual aid situation do you find yourself in now as these other places are dealing with bigger impacts than what you saw?
Yeah, that very well could be the second part of our mission here. So now that we're through this, as they enact some of the mutual aid agreements that we'll be sending crews, we're making those calls right now, having conversations to see what we can do to help out the others in need.
So what happens for you right now? In your line of work, I would imagine that there's never a point where you just simply stand down. Hurricane season is not over. Are you still sort of posturing to be prepared for the next emergency, next natural disaster that may come?
That's exactly what we do. You sweat in the boardroom so you don't bleed on the battlefield. So we're constantly updating our plans and procedures. This event, revealed to us some changes that we need because we had to call a few audibles in this place on our emergency preparations. We opened up a shelter because, the storm simply just did not take the track that we thought it would. So we opened up a shelter in the city of Brunswick. So constantly revising our plans, and we're going to immediately start preparing to help others. Thank you.
All right. We appreciate you making some time for us today. Andy Leonza, the Director of Emergency Management in Glenn County, Georgia. Thank you.
And there is more news ahead.
You're watching NBC News Daily.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Can you tell us what it was like? Our NBC News exclusive.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now. News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
Well, Hurricane Ian devastated parts of Florida, and restoring people's lives is going to take months, if not years.
Now is the time when millions across the country lean in to help those impacted. Jacqueline Henderson from our sister network, LX News, shows us some of the most effective ways to give.
Hurricane Ian devastated communities across Florida.
This storm is doing a number on the state of Florida. It is going to continue to move through this state, and there's going to continue to be a number of adverse effects.
And now that the storm's passed, many are asking, what can we do to help? The immediate reaction for some is to pack up that donation pile full of clothes, shoes, toys, or maybe even unused medication and ship it to those who need it. And although well-intentioned, sometimes donating all of that stuff can do more harm than good. That's why in cases like these, a lot of charities will be straight up and just ask for cash.
So typically the most impactful way to give is by making a monetary contribution. It's how that organization can quickly activate it and put it to where the need is greatest.
It makes sense, but how can you make sure your donation is effective and going to a reputable organization? Well, Kevin's here to break it all down for us. He works at Charity Navigator, a nonprofit that evaluates and ranks the performance of charities in the U.S.
Unfortunately, disasters typically have very long tails. It's not just a matter of that it's the immediate. Sometimes it takes many months, sometimes it takes many years to support the communities that are actually affected. And so I would say that give until it feels good. Thinking about the organization's actual delivery on impact. What are their actual outcomes? What are their actual outputs? And how are they making a difference within the cause area? Do they have good diversity, equity, inclusion practices? Are they actually listening to the folks that they are serving? And then in addition to that, looking at, again, what we call leadership and adaptability, but do they have an articulated strategy for how they're making a difference?
Reputable charities and organizations will also have things like their IRS information, annual audits, reports, and privacy policies on their websites for easy access to the public.
So generally just looking for those trust signals and past progress as well. So, specifically for disasters, you don't want it to be an organization's first time providing relief and recovery. You typically want to make sure that they have demonstrated that year over year.
So what if you don't want to donate to an organization, but to an individual? Is that a good use of your money?
Inherently, there is more risk in supporting a personal fundraiser. And while times of crisis bring out the best in people, they can also bring out the worst in people. Where you have people that go online and they put out very compelling stories and they receive a lot of contributions, and there's no accountability there. You don't understand how they're actually using that money. Versus if you're supporting an established nonprofit that is getting audited, they're filing with the 990, there's evaluators like Charity Navigator that are in this space, it's typically a safer way to support kind of on that mass level. Typically, you're going to have more impact by making one larger contribution to a single organization or maybe a small pool of organizations versus spreading that very thin. So if you have $1,000 to give, if you're giving that $1,000 to maybe 2 organizations versus giving $1 to every organization and giving to 1,000 different organizations. So we would say to concentrate your giving. Of course, not everybody's able to give monetary contributions, and so we encourage people to give however they can, whether that's the time, talent, or treasure. You just want to make sure that it's goods that those folks actually need. A best practice in the nonprofit sector is to ask the beneficiaries what it is that they need and not just dictating that to them. Do it for the other person primarily, but you're also doing it for yourself. You never know when you're going to be kind of in that same situation where you're affected by a disaster or some sort of personal crisis and you'd want other people to be there. So it's kind of a matter of putting yourself in their shoes and again, kind of opening up your heart and wallet towards them.
We are looking at some new aerial video of the devastation on Sanibel Island. This is that Florida island that's now completely cut off, isolated from the mainland. We know a major section of the causeway connecting the two was washed out when Ian hit on Wednesday.
Well, this morning on the Today Show, the island city manager called the storm catastrophic and biblical. About 6,300 people live on the island. The city's mayor says residents in about 200 homes chose not to evacuate ahead of Ian. Crews are now searching for survivors and delivering supplies. I'm Cynthia McFadden.
And I'm Aaron Gilchrist. You're watching NBC News Daily.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
Tonight, I interviewed Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg about the ongoing delays. You seem to be pointing the finger at the airlines. They're pointing the finger back. Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better?
No stress, no mess, just yum.
That's it.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson. Weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now. Look at what's making headlines around the world. Whenever it happens, wherever you are, it's here now.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Top Story with Tom Llamas is your news playlist on NBC News Now. And now, you can listen to it as a podcast. Available anytime and anywhere.
Happy Friday and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd, and for the second time in 3 days, Hurricane Ian has made landfall in the United States, slamming into South Carolina less than 2 hours ago. This time as a Category 1 storm. The sustained winds were just 85 miles per hour, but still a strong hurricane. Coastal communities are bracing for a storm surge of 4 to 7 feet, and that's what makes this hurricane stronger than the average Category 1. The wind speeds may be manageable. It's this storm surge and massiveness that makes it so difficult. You're looking at the live pictures here now from Myrtle Beach. The center of the storm came ashore pretty much right between Myrtle Beach and Charleston. We're going to speak with Charleston's mayor and the Myrtle Beach emergency manager in just a moment. As Ian batters the Carolinas, we're getting new pictures from Florida's Gulf Coast, where folks are beginning the process of cleaning up in the light of day after Ian made landfall there about 48 hours ago as one of the most powerful and deadly storms ever to hit the state. It's also expected to be one of the most expensive storms ever to hit Florida. These aerials have just come into us from Lee County. That is where Fort Myers is. It's one of the hardest hit areas, and it gives you a sense of the total devastation in this region. Wiped out a lot of buildings that maybe, frankly, weren't up to code. This is also the scene on the ground in Fort Myers, Florida. Officials say as many as 21 deaths have been reported so far statewide, although they caution those numbers could fluctuate. Nearly 2 million customers are still without power. And by the way, it's in these days afterward that sometimes you see accidental deaths, whether it's from bad management of generators or water issues. Rescue teams in Florida have so far responded to more than 3,000 homes, with officials saying they've conducted 700 rescues. Here's some Coast Guard video of its teams making aerial rescues on Sanibel Island after the storm completely destroyed the area's only connection to the mainland. In a briefing this afternoon in Fort Myers, Governor Ron DeSantis warned of a long recovery ahead for residents devastated by this storm. Just a few moments later, President Biden addressed the devastation himself, vowing to offer whatever resources are needed to help the states rebuild.
It's not just a crisis for Florida. This is an American crisis.
We're all in this together. We're just beginning to see the scale of that destruction. It's likely to rank among the worst of the nation's and the worst in the nation's history. You've all seen it on television, homes and property wiped out. It's going to take months, years to rebuild. And our hearts go out to all those folks whose lives have been absolutely devastated by this storm.
Shaquille Brewster's on the ground in Charleston, South Carolina. So, Shaq, Charleston, I know, just had flooding issues last year. So, obviously, a big concern is going to be a storm surge. How's the city holding up?
That's exactly right. And, you know, when you talk to residents, when our team has been talking with people preparing for this storm, many of them knew exactly what to do. They knew to clear out the storm drains. They knew where to put the sandbags because this is an area that is used to flooding. And then you had that rain. And that's, you know, the eye of the hurricane did not hit Charleston. It hit about 60 miles north of Charleston. But that impact was still there for this city. This is a city that saw wind gusts of up to 70 miles an hour, that saw about 7 inches of rain, more than 7 inches of rain, unofficial totals, over the past 24 hours. And currently, at last check, there are about 90,000 people in this area without power. So this city definitely felt the effects of this hurricane. They got the tropical storm effects of it. But what you're seeing along the coast, if you go up the South Carolina coast, that's where you see the biggest impacts. I'm thinking of Pauley Island, where an entire pier collapsed. You had the police department there saying that the flooding that they were received was catastrophic. Now, we know that most of that flooding is starting to recede right now in the downtown Charleston area. We're also seeing some of those waters come down, but you're getting an idea. Although South Carolina didn't get anything close to what you saw out of Florida, it was definitely a major impact when it hit when that Category 1 storm hit the coast of South Carolina.
And Shaq, look, you were in Florida yesterday. You're seeing Ian. You saw Ian leave the state of Florida. Now you had to go to Charleston to watch it come back. Compare and contrast.
Yeah. You know, where I was in Florida, I was in Jacksonville. So there it was about 100 miles. The eye of the storm was about 100 miles away from Jacksonville, but you still got the outer bands. And, you know, I think one thing that you continue to hear from meteorologists is despite you being far from the actual eye of the storm, the power of the storm, because of how wide it is, the size that it takes up, it impacts a lot of people. So the flooding concern that we were hearing about in Jacksonville, while it didn't come true in terms of the levels that they were concerned about, there was flooding, there was significant rain, and that's a similar idea and a similar concern that you're hearing in the Charleston area, that it's dumping so much rain on these areas, the ground is so saturated, so although the wind speed might not be what you see in the southwestern part of Florida, it still has that water impact, it still leads to down trees, down power lines, and a large impact. I think the size of this storm is really something that is so notable about Hurricane Ian.
Yeah, that's for sure. Shaquille Brewster in Charleston for us. Shaq, thank you. And I'm joined now by the mayor of Charleston, John Tecklenburg. And Mr. Mayor, I know you dealt with these floods last year, these tidal floods. Obviously, the concern with this storm is the fact that it seems the storm surge and the water's in some ways more damaging than the wind. How's the city holding up, and do you think you can avoid major flooding issues?
Well, thank you, Chuck. I think we held up well. We were well prepared, and I believe we're a very resilient city. In a way, we've had practice now for about 8 years in a row with storms every year, which belies the whole story about impact from climate change and extreme weather becoming a more common occurrence here in Charleston and around the world, and doing those things that are needed to protect ourselves from these impacts from climate change.
You know, each storm these days gives us an idea. Oh, we didn't mitigate for that. Oh, we didn't mitigate for that. What are you seeing in this storm that tells you, okay, we were ready for this, but it turns out we've got to do more here to be ready for a storm like this next time?
Well, Well, we know, Chuck, there's more for us to do because you just can't put in place all of these mitigation measures, this infrastructure in an instant. It does take some time. We've got lots of projects underway, including the reinforcement and heightening elevation of our sea battery wall, which isn't quite finished yet. And so we were afraid with a combination of surge and high tide today that it would be breached once again like it was in a few hurricanes recently, but it was not, thankfully, given the fact that Ian stayed a little offshore, and in fact we ended up getting the counterclockwise motion pushing out a little bit. So rather than a 4 to 7 foot surge in Charleston Harbor, I think it was only about 1 to 2 feet. So that was a blessing for us. That being said, we had a lot of water in the city today. We had a ton of rain. We had tidal impacts, and we closed 41 streets. We had trees down, but we're already cleaning up and taking care of those things. And we're going to be back in business Monday and welcome you to come visit.
Well, it's one of the great cities to visit. Let me ask you this. How many in your city, how many residents and businesses do have flood insurance and how many don't?
Exact numbers, I'll be honest, I don't have on top of my head, but about half of our city is in a floodplain or eligible for federal flood insurance. We encourage all of our citizens who are eligible to take it out because it's a good protection to have.
Do you think we should figure out a way to make that mandatory? I mean, at some point, there's got to be, you can't expect taxpayers to bail out people that don't buy insurance that they could have.
Well, yeah, it's subsidized, of course, the whole program by the federal government. But as prices have been going up, it's hard to tell folks who are on fixed income and maybe don't have any mortgage where they're required to have the flood insurance to force them to do it. We certainly recommend it. We try to help people get it, but it's not something we can require of folks to do.
And finally, state resources, federal resources, are you getting everything you need? What more would you like?
Well, we are, and we were in direct communications both with the State House, with the governor, and the White House call today. Everybody's been as cordial as possible and willing to help. In a way, I feel like Charleston dodged a little bit of a bullet today, not to say we don't have impacts and cleanup to do, but as I mentioned, we were prepared, we're pretty resilient, and we're cleaning up and going to be back in business in no time. My heart goes out as you've been showing these images of folks down in Florida, and I agree with the president. This is a national crisis, and all Americans should come together and help in any way they can with the repairs and renovations and help down to our neighbors in Florida.
Climate change doesn't know a political party, and it doesn't know a state border. Anyway, Mayor Tecklenburg, good to have you on, and I'm glad to know that Charleston will be open and ready for business next week. Thank you, sir. Let me move on to the emergency manager for Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. That's Travis Glatke. Mr. Glatke, I want to start with this. Tell me, how's the island holding up? I know this thing basically came in between. Charleston feels like it dodged a bullet. How would you describe things in Myrtle Beach?
I think we held up pretty well. Our bad luck was that high tide was at 11 a.m. this morning, and that's really when the storm surge started coming in. We had reports of coastal storm surge as high as 6 feet. When you mix that with high tide, just some bad luck. We know that there's flooding, but those areas along the coast are, we identified them early on to know that they were prone to flooding. Right. So I think we made our best preparations and mitigation possible.
You've done some new mitigation. I'm curious what held up and what really pleased you that it held up?
Well, we initiated a mass notification system roughly 3 weeks ago. We were able to use it throughout this storm. We shut down the beach on Thursday and Friday. We notified everyone. We've also been working with Public Works to make sure that the drainage systems are operating properly. They're working around the clock. Our utility companies, they had to pull the trucks off due to the high winds, but as soon as it's safe for them to go back out, we feel pretty confident we can get people's electric and gas put back on.
You've had a lot of new residents move to Myrtle Beach during the pandemic. A lot of people moved north to south, right? Finding new places to live, work remote. These are people that have never prepared for a storm. You know, you could have people like myself who grew up in Florida, you know the drill. You have people that don't know the drill. How concerned were you about that, and how well did these new residents follow orders, if you will?
Yeah, it's certainly a concern. You know, I'm from Massachusetts. I mean, we have people from all over. But, you know, I think that with us doing our community outreach and our public education, that's really been a priority for our emergency management division and all of our public safety departments to get out there. We started in March with hurricane preparedness activities. We've been going strong since then, trying to educate and inform people as much as possible. I think we've done a pretty good job.
You know, a Category 1 storm doesn't scare many people. I was telling my own staff, oh, geez, Category 1 in Miami. But the storm surge is something that I think people don't necessarily respect when it's a Category 1, perhaps as much as they do as Category 4. That had to be another concern you had about maybe residents not fully appreciating the force of this storm surge.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, we had the police department and our water rescue personnel out there before the beginning of the storm, making sure that the beach was cleared, making sure that you know, buildings were cleared as much as possible from the population that were along the coast. So we were out there, you know, trying to prevent it and mitigate the circumstances as much as possible.
You didn't have a mandatory evacuation order. Was that a debate?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. All week long, we debated it. We certainly encouraged it throughout the week, even if, you know, we originally thought it was going to be a tropical storm. When it hit the hurricane, we had some real strong debates back and forth. The decision was made not to do any sort of mandatory evacuation. I think for the most part, the areas held up well. Like I said, we've had areas that we knew were prone to flooding. Right. We tried our best to probably, you know, inform the people, you know, maybe evacuation is the best for you. But yeah, ultimately, we did not make any sort of mandatory evacuation. All right. Travis Glatke, the emergency manager for Myrtle Beach. Mr. Glatke, I'm glad to know. Seems as if the worst may be behind you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Let's turn now to the cleanup in Florida. That's where we find Blaine Alexander. She's in Fort Myers. And this is probably the heart as you know, Blaine, I had Craig Fugate. He's going to be on the show later. I had him on my podcast today. He was the emergency manager for FEMA and Florida. And he said, you know, what Andrew did to Miami and just changing it forever is what he thinks just happened to what Ian has done to Fort Myers.
Yeah. And I think that's just from what I've seen here, Chuck. I do think that that's a fair assessment. You know, what we're looking at right now, this used to be a marina. This used to be a popular place where people would come, rent boats, rent paddle boats, and go out and enjoy a whole lot of water life. And this whole strip is now non-existent. That's the brunt of it. I spoke with a gentleman who owns this place here behind me. He told me that, quite frankly, some other people just did not expect it to be this bad, didn't expect it to be this powerful. They tried their best to secure the boats they had, secure the kayaks, but you can see what it's done to this building, and you can't see it because it's off camera, Chuck, but really a lot of the boats that were over here to my right in the water are now completely on the other side, over to my left. They're in streets, they're up against branches and things over that way, and that's what we're seeing all up and down this coastline. One thing that we have been seeing is a lot of people coming and seeing this damage for the very first time, Chuck, and we can look at pictures, you can look at aerials, you can look at news reports, but there's really nothing that compares to somebody walking up, seeing the place that they called home or the place that brought in their livelihood and seeing it destroyed for the very first time. Unfortunately, that's a lot of what we're seeing today. I do want to make the point, and I think it's important to mention, though, even though there are a lot of people who are surveying the damage, there is a lot of urgency still. There's still a lot of search and rescue going on. The emergency, this kind of race against time, isn't over just because the storm has blown through. Sanibel Island is a perfect example of that. You know, where we're standing right now, every now and then we hear choppers fly overhead. We hear military choppers flying over that way towards Sanibel Island. That's because the one road in and out, as you know, has been washed away. It's not passable. The only way to get there is by chopper or by boat. What they're doing is they're sending search and rescue teams over there. Officials say that they're dropping people there. They're literally knocking door by door, checking to see if there are people there. Right. And unfortunately, Chuck, they say as they continue to clear those houses, they do expect to see the death toll go up as they kind of get the full extent of what they're looking at.
You know, Blaine, when will authorities feel like they have an idea of how many people are unaccounted for, and you know, where they can sort of target their search and rescue efforts? And then when does this only become recovery?
You know, right now they still say it's search and rescue. They still there are still people who are over there who are just trapped and essentially trying to get out. Unfortunately, in a briefing earlier this morning, one official did say they've had divers go in and look in homes and see what they believe to be human remains, and so they just can't get to them right now. That's when we're going to start to see that death toll increase, Chuck, as they get access to those places.
And you've taken a look at the devastation. Are you seeing a clear pattern of what buildings survived and what didn't?
You know, what we're seeing right here, really it looks like anything that's facing that way, which is where the storm blew through, was sheared. That's the brunt of it. There's a high-rise, you can see it right over there. There's damage there, certainly. We know there's damage, but it's still standing. There were people who kind of rode out the storm in high-rises like that and other kind of places that they could find. I've got to say what's interesting, we've really been all over the state of Florida. We started in Jacksonville, drove to Orlando, and then drove down here to Fort Myers. One thing that I am noticing is that you can see where the real devastation starts. As you're kind of driving down the highway, you see trees in the road, you see on-ramps and off-ramps that are still flooded, and you see destruction as you start to get closer. I think what's important to point out, though, is that resources are still missing here. You know, we're more than 80 degrees here in Fort Myers. There's no water, there's no electricity, there's no bottled water that anybody can purchase. And as you know, Florida has the highest or among the highest elderly populations in the U.S. So getting those basic resources back on is an absolute necessity, Chuck.
Yeah, I think Charlotte County has something like nearly 50% of its population's over the age of 65. So we have a lot of seniors to be getting bottled water to and resources to ASAP. Blaine Alexander on the ground for us in Fort Myers. Blaine, thank you. Our team coverage of Hurricane Ian continues next. We'll have NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns here. We'll speak with an official from one of the most devastated counties in Florida about the recovery efforts there. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
Hallie Jackson Now. Weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
News is happening now.
Look at what's making headlines around the world.
We're coming on the air with breaking news.
This is a significant moment.
Whenever it happens, wherever you are, NBC News, streaming free now.
Top Story with Tom Llamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Mr. Secretary, when is this going to get better? You came into this job saying you were going to fight crime. Have you been successful? Found a way to put that. Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
Right now on NBC News Now,
we begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism?
Do you think this could have happened without social media? We're coming on the air with the news. NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
Here's what's happening in your neck of the woods.
To cover the news, you have to be in it. This is how so many towns and cities are protecting themselves. They're pushing the gates open. Was there a school officer on campus? That's what we've been told.
No. Top Story with Tom Yamas. Weeknights at 7 on NBC News Now.
Welcome back. We continue to track what is left of Hurricane Ian. It made landfall just 2 hours ago, again, this time in South Carolina. President Biden has already approved emergency declarations for South Carolina and Florida. Georgia's governor has also declared a state of emergency. I believe Virginia's governor has as well. But to give you a sense of the size of Ian, the bands of this storm, believe it or not, stretch from Georgia to New England. All of the original 13 colonies. NBC meteorologist Bill Cairns has the latest. So, Bill, you like that 13 colonies reference? I see that.
That was good.
All right.
I wasn't ready for that.
Tell me where we're headed here, and I hope tell people in the Mid-Atlantic that this thing's not going to sit on them and drop rain on them for the next 3 days.
Yeah, as long as it keeps moving, we're a lot better off, and that's all about the rain. So we went into today with, this is a life-threatening situation. It's a Category 1 storm making landfall. You worry about the storm surge, you worry about trees falling on houses and people and cars, and then, of course, you worry about the flash flooding. So the storm surge portion of the storm is over with. We know that in the Myrtle Beach area, southwards down to Georgetown, where it made landfall, this was the second highest storm surge they ever recorded. So we had some serious water problems. There were water rescues. A lot of that area is kind of built, though, for this. A lot of houses are up on stilts, so we're hoping we don't have too much damage into homes. So we'll find that out probably tomorrow morning. And this is the last moments that this is going to be a hurricane, by the way. Winds are at about 85 miles per hour. It's going to head northwards at about 15. You were mentioning that rain shield, and that continues all the way up now to Richmond, the Norfolk, and it's going to head up into the New York City area tonight. The highest wind gust that we had was about 92 miles per hour. So that's a pretty significant, crazy wind. So we are going to see tomorrow when we get the pictures in from the Charleston area, there's going to be a lot of wind damage in the Charleston area. And then as far as what we're going to deal with as far as flash flooding goes, we're really concerned with what happens. This heavy rain band right now located over Columbia, that's setting up over the Charlotte area, and that may sit there right through the evening rush hour into tonight. That could quickly drop about 6 inches of rain. So that's one concern with it. And then, of course, Chuck, you've probably been down here to the, Norfolk, the Hampton Roads area there. They always flood. I mean, they get nor'easters, they get flooding. And so there's flash flood warnings all through that region.
Let me tell you, I'm curious at this point how the other issue that happens with these hurricanes as they sort of trickle north is that even though the wind is 50 to 60 miles an hour, we got more trees up here that haven't been through 50 and 60 miles an hour. I mean, how much inland, how much of do you expect those strong of winds for the Virginias, the Marylands, the Tennessees as it keeps marching north?
Well, so far that hasn't materialized. So we were really concerned with the heavy rain. So it gets into the soil. The roots aren't holding on as tight as they would, and then you get those winds on top of it. Right now we're sitting at like 120,000 people without power in South Carolina. That number you'd think with a Category 1 hurricane making landfall would be a little bit worse. But, the highest winds really avoided areas south of Charleston. And inland, we haven't seen it yet. So I know a lot of people in Charlotte and Raleigh, Winston-Salem, Greensboro, they're all wondering in Fayetteville, are we going to lose our power tonight? I think it'll be isolated. I don't think we're seeing wind gusts 40 to 50 miles per hour, and that'll probably even trickle up to Richmond and D.C. later on tonight. But it doesn't look like this is going to be a million people without power. So, I'd say about 99.5% of the damage from this hurricane has already been done.
That is, I guess we can call that good news at this point.
Let's get it over with.
There's not bad news going forward. Bill Cairns.
Right.
What a week for you, sir. I hope you do get some rest this weekend. So thank you. I'm joined now by Charlotte County Commissioner Bill Truex. And we were talking about the damage in Charlotte County. And Mr. Truex, I was talking about the fact your population, you have a high elderly population. So I want to talk about what my reporter was just telling me a few minutes ago about just simply getting some bottled water in and things like that. Tell me how those recovery efforts are going.
Well, those missions are still underway. Unfortunately, we do have several trailers of MREs that come in to help assist in feeding people in an emergent situation. We have an organization coming in on Sunday that will be able to gear up to feed 50,000 people per day. Our population is 62% over the age of 65. Okay. And we had over 300 backlogged 911 calls that we could not respond to until the winds had subsided. Wow. So there's a lot of work out there now with strike teams doing damage assessment, making sure they're going door to door, trying to locate people. We had 31 people on Little Gasparilla Island that chose not to leave. Fortunately, we did not get the storm surge that they got down in Lee County, because if we'd have gotten that, I would imagine that those 31 souls very possibly could have been fatalities. Yeah. We do have 12 fatalities, as I understand it, in Charlotte County now. Some of them are storm-related. Some of them don't appear to be. We still haven't got conclusions from the ME's office just yet. That's kind of where we are now. You can see the video in front of you.
Yeah. You just did a helicopter tour. I mean, just could you recognize how unrecognizable were things to you?
It's amazing. I've been there 31 years, and I'm up in the air trying to figure out where I'm at in many cases. Now, when I came in from the water, I knew certain areas, and I know certain landmarks from the sky, but it was difficult. I couldn't even find my own house, to be honest. We flew over it, and I had a very difficult time identifying, oh, there's mine back there. Wow. It's a mess. I live in an area called Rotunda, and I only was in my section. It looks like a war zone there. All manufactured mobile housing is virtually demolished in this county, particularly in West County. I saw myself from that tour. But it's true devastation. I was here for Charlie. I was here for Irma. And I will tell you that this is a Charlie that is just hit the entire community. It was much broader, as you just indicated. Even still, the bands are expanding very far from the center of the eye, and we actually dodged a bullet. I tell people we're blessed because we did not get this.
Yeah, no, I take your point on the water issue. Let me ask you this: with the issue of, you have an elderly population in this county, power. Many folks need power for medical supplies and things like that. What's the status of power in the county?
The status of power, we started with 100% loss of power. As of this morning, we were at 16% restored. I don't know. They're doing the briefing right now, 4 o'clock. They started. I don't know where we are. We're a long road away from being able to get power to many neighborhoods, because the transmission lines have been affected. There's some lines down still in West County. There's a lot of poles bent on a lot of the main runs or leaning that have to be shored up before, they can get power to the neighborhoods. We could be looking at, I'm hoping we have 50% by, Wednesday or Thursday of next week. But that may be an ambitious goal at this point.
Yeah, people are going to have to prepare for weeks. Let me ask you this. You talked about the manufactured housing didn't hold up very well. What's a lesson you're going to take away from this when it comes to the rebuild?
Well, Chuck, it's a great question. I'm a building contractor. I own a construction company. That's my other job. And so many things that we see, some of the older construction obviously doesn't hold up as well as the newer codes do. I mean, the things that are built that are new codes that have been perfected year after year after year with the lessons that we have learned from Michael and from Irma. We continue to put that science back into building, and it will make a difference. I can tell you, it was obvious to me in the air that shingles aren't a very good option in Florida. Nope. It's a more affordable option. Mine held together pretty well for being 18 years old, but the metal roofs, they really, under the new code, really seem to hold up very, very well. The tile did as well, as long as no projectiles hit it. So there's a lot to learn from this storm. There's a lot that was learned from Irma, and I will tell you, FEMA is on the ground here. I've got to thank President Biden. I've gotten a couple calls from the White House, from staff there. They're very interested and concerned. The governor has taken a notice and has been here. Our CFO is helping us to set up an insurance village to help the citizens of our community. And Senator Scott was here earlier just thanking all the first responders and the people. Our team here locally on the ground is phenomenal. Our sheriff's office, all those employees, our Charlotte County Fire EMS folks, all our triage people, the staff in the EOC, they're working tirelessly to try to make certain that our residents get back on track.
Well, look, I'm glad we could bring some attention to what's going on in Charlotte County. This is something, again, you have an older population. When we talk about recovery efforts, I think about Charlotte County almost first and foremost right now. Bill Truix, thanks for sharing the situation with us.
Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate it.
You got it. Still ahead, we're going to move globally. Vladimir Putin makes possibly his most vitriolic statement ever against the West. And of course, we're going to continue our coverage of Hurricane Ian as the Carolina coast deals with flooding from the rain, high winds, and some dangerous storm surge. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
Right now on NBC News Now,
we begin with breaking news just coming in.
What's happening now, what's happening next, and what it means for you.
We're continuing to follow the Russian attack on Ukraine.
There's an intense artillery battle underway.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind.
Fewer people are content to just offer their thoughts and prayers.
Stunning testimony at the January 6th hearing.
Americans face the highest inflation rate in decades.
Parts of Virginia cleaning up after severe storms.
Flames forcing thousands to evacuate.
When do I play meteorologist? Only when the heat is this bad.
Another special night of election coverage right here at NBC News Now.
Results are coming in.
This Tuesday is going to be huge.
This is big when we're talking about November.
This feels like an ideological fight to the death. Is there room for common ground?
What do you think when you see the activism?
Do you think this could have happened without social media? We're coming on the air with the news NBC Scoop.
Bringing the news to you is not only a job, it's an honor.
You don't know when your moment's coming, but when it does, you take it.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now. The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
A masked killer takes aim and fires. A fatal attraction that leads investigators to turn towards their own. Internal Affairs, a new podcast from Dateline. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
Welcome back. In the latest escalation of the war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin formally announced today that Russia has illegally annexed 4 Ukrainian territories. Of course, he didn't say they illegally annexed them, but the rest of the world did. He said the people of those regions will become Russian citizens forever. Even by Putin's standards, the speech he delivered today was especially vitriolic and antagonistic. He railed against the West as the, quote, enemy. In response to Russia's illegal annexation, the Biden administration announced a slew of sanctions targeting Russia's defense and technology sectors, as well as a number of top Russian officials. Biden issued this stark warning to Putin today.
America is fully prepared with our NATO allies to defend every single inch of NATO territory. Every single inch. So, Mr. Putin, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. Every inch.
Every inch. Does every inch include an attack on a pipeline? Just hours after Putin's speech, President Zelensky announced his country has submitted what he called an accelerated application to join NATO. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Ukrainian officials are blaming Russia for an attack on a civilian convoy outside the city of Zaporizhia. That's, of course, where that nuclear power plant is. Officials there say this attack killed 30 people, including 2 children. 88 others were hospitalized. And now we're going to go out to London, where Keir Simmons has more on what it is that Putin may be thinking right now.
Views about guns can vary widely depending on where you are. For example, I'm here right now in suburban Baltimore, and the views here are very different than the views in a place like where I am now, in downtown Baltimore, a place where the murder rate this year is outpacing that of last year.
I realized it was really a stress reliever. Like, I was having kids, like, really coming in there wanting to fight everyone.
Alex Long, a community activist who's lost family members to gun violence, has decided to open a gym to try to lure kids off the streets and away from guns.
And by the time they left, they literally would come to me and like, man, if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably get locked up.
In a city with more than 240 homicides so far this year, guns here are easy to get.
13, 14-year-olds that will have access, and it's deliberate. Like I say, guys will come around here with cars and trucks full of firearms, and the purpose is target our youth. Where are our leaders to tackle this issue? Because these are our kids. These aren't some war-torn country or a bunch of soldiers that have been heavily trained. These are our kids, and we turned our back on them. So that's our fault. You know, so our kids, they felt alone. They feel like they have to do it on their own. And sadly, in a lot of cases, I have to agree with them.
Well, that was actually Cal Perry, and that was actually, we sort of skipped segments there. That is our preview of Meet the Press Reports, sort of the changing nature of America's gun culture. Who owns a gun these days? Who are today's gun owners? It's not as stereotyped as you might think. It's a terrific 30 minutes. I hope you, if you want to go on Peacock, you can find it anywhere, YouTube, Peacock, etc. We had expected a report from Keir Simmons on the latest out of the Kremlin. That ended up being a bit of a technical difficulty, so my apologies for that confusion there. But do check out that new episode of Meet the Press Reports, which you can go check out right this instant. Up next, we're going to dive into some of the big changes in recent days in the battle for Senate control. It's gotten a lot more competitive, and the stakes have been raised for some upcoming debates. And we continue to monitor Hurricane Ian as it pounds the Carolina coast. You're watching Meet the Press now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers right now on Morning News Now.
We're staying on top of the breaking situation in Ukraine.
We are watching dangerous heat this week. Recession, I mean, is that where we're headed? Is there any way to avoid that?
Morning News Now, streaming weekdays at 7.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
From Brooklyn, we're next to the subway station. The state's reservoirs are alarmingly low. War will pass them by.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now.
A masked killer takes aim and fires. A fatal attraction that leads investigators to turn towards their own. Internal Affairs, a new podcast from Dateline. Listen now wherever you get your podcasts.
We're here to start conversations because it's not my job to tell you what to think. My job is to think about what you tell me.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
These days, it feels like the news never stops. So let's get into it. What's happening right now, what it all means for you for an hour every day. It can be hard to keep up, so let's get started together.
Hallie Jackson Now, weekdays at 5 on NBC News Now.
As we look out over the latest city-turned-crime scene, we see the things left behind. Back now with our NBC News exclusive. Sometimes the news can be difficult and overwhelming for kids to understand, so we've created a newscast just for them. We hope your family will watch Nightly News Kids Edition.
For Dateline Premium, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts. Internal Affairs, the new podcast from Dateline. Listen now.
Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
The indictment of a former president, or perhaps candidate for president, would arguably tear the country apart. Is that your concern? Can you update us on the status of negotiations?
For Dateline Premium, subscribe now on Apple Podcasts.
The day's biggest political stories with trusted insight now and expert analysis now. A daily look at the politics behind the headlines. Meet the Press Now, streaming weekdays at 4 p.m. on NBC News Now. Now Tonight with Joshua Johnson, streaming weeknights at 8 on NBC News Now.
Welcome back. We're actually going to take a break from storm coverage and do a little politics. With just a few hours to spare, the House this afternoon approved a short-term spending package to avoid a government shutdown. Senate signed off on that package yesterday. It contains more than $12 billion in Ukraine aid, and it heads to President Biden's desk. Members did not want to see a shutdown. They wanted to get home to hit the campaign trail. We're now 39 days away. And as we reported in First Read this morning, we've seen some shifting winds in the battle, particularly in the battle for control of the Senate. A boost in Republican spending that was expected has blunted some Democratic momentum in a couple of key Senate races. And while Democrats are weathering the storm in some places like Georgia and Pennsylvania, the big change is in Wisconsin, where Democrat Mandela Barnes has seen Republican incumbent Ron Johnson surge in the past couple of weeks. So joining me now on set, Stephen Hayes, editor and CEO of The Dispatch and an NBC News political analyst, Eugene Scott, national political reporter for The Washington Post, and Stephanie Shriak, Democratic strategist and senior advisor for the Strategic Victory Fund Super PAC. Steve, you're a Wisconsin native, so I want to start with you. I feel like we went from a flip favorite to speak in football terms, where Mandela Barnes looked like a 1 or 2 point favorite a month ago, and now Ron Johnson looks like the 1 or 2 point favorite. And there's this moment that we're in where even though Barnes is still right there, feels like he's really taking on water.
Yeah, it feels like he's moving. I mean, look, if you go back and you remember what was to have been the Democratic primary in Wisconsin ended up not being much of a Democratic primary. It sort of cleared the field for Mandela Barnes. And I think there are moderate Democrats who at the time were, happy to say on background, they didn't love this decision because Mandela Barnes is pretty far left. And while that can work in Madison and some other progressive areas of the state, it's not going to work out state. And I think Ron Johnson, as often as he's said things that I think moderates or independents would regard as crazy, he's been part of the election denial argument now a number of times. He's sort of the crazy they know. If that makes sense. And when you contrast him with Barnes, it's politically or philosophically not a great contrast.
You know, Stephanie, when people look at, if Ron Johnson wins, you think, how the heck has he become a 3-term senator, right? And then you'll look and a question's got to be asked. The three races have always been against people from Madison, whether it's Mandela Barnes or twice against Russ Feingold. Madison is not the rest of Wisconsin. Right. And I've talked to some Milwaukee Democrats who said, that was the thing they were most concerned about. It's not about whether an African-American can win statewide. Can a Madison Democrat win statewide?
I don't know. Senator Tammy Baldwin did pretty well out of Madison.
Fair point.
Just let's not forget that. I've always felt that this race was going to tighten up. You've got a situation with Senator Johnson, who said he wasn't going to run again. He is an election denier. This is all going to come back. We knew this race was going to get nasty. Of course, all these races are getting nasty. I mean, we are in the time where all the negative ads are coming in.
Right.
And they've got a really big problem with Johnson. He's still, I would argue, one of the very most vulnerable incumbents on either side.
He's not popular. He's not well-liked at all.
His numbers are terrible.
Yeah.
And it's a state where you've got also very close governor's race. So you have massive turnout. The governor's looking better, moving in the right direction. There's a lot of dynamics in that state going on right now. So I think we are far from done. And I think we've got a tight race. And our numbers, I will say, I've seen a number of polls that have this, the coin flip. It's just really, really tight.
Eugene, one of the things, if people are going to backseat drive Mandela Barnes, they're going to say, every hit you're taking on right now is a hit everybody saw coming. And he didn't make an attempt to inoculate. The way, for instance, we've seen Fetterman do in different ways. He decided to make Oz, he made Oz take on water in August, and he's, I think, handling it well. Warnock took it to Walker early and also tried to inoculate himself. Barnes did.
No, he did. And I think he really thought that what he was putting forward would be attractive to most of the voters because Johnson is so unpopular. But demographics are what they are. And most registered voters in Wisconsin are actually Republicans. As you've noted, most people in Wisconsin do not live in Milwaukee. They do not live in Madison. There are far more rural residents than there are urban residents. And the politics that come with those demographics were going to be hard for Mandela to overcome, period, even if he had been more aggressive in approaching his opponent, and the fact that he wasn't isn't helping him right now.
Stephanie, let's talk about the bigger picture here. a lot of Democrats were quietly warning in Labor Day, and before Democrats get too happy about the midterms taking a new turn, let's see what happens after a month of money. We've had a month of money. Wisconsin is a big one. How else do you think the party's held up?
Well, I think the Senate's going to be a very close race. I felt that the entire time. What's interesting is this map is completely turning around. You've got McConnell basically pulling out of Arizona. You've got New Hampshire that everybody forgets that New Hampshire gets